too?
I don't think so.
Was she gonna be here in person?
I don't think so.
Because it has her on report on breakdown by.
It's attached.
Oh, it's just attached.
I assume.
Yeah. She said she was gonna be out of town.
Mm-hmm.
How are you?
So, here we are, again, ready for fun and excitement.
See that? Look, at least two of us are ready for fun. I think Mom's going on. We're ready for fun and excitement.
I sure hope so. That's why I'm here. I'm expecting fun and excitement.
Woohoo! You okay?
Plus there's air conditioning.
Oh no. At least you're not on the phone. You're here in person, so you can flag us down instead of. In the hall, we're in the plan. Fun voices. My dad could do a Donald Duck voice. Oh, with the germs. See, I was going with the positive way. Makes sense.
Definitely got the right guy to do this. Yeah. I don't know.
So I gotta call Gavin at 12. Just because he's gonna
Tune in. Did you hear from anybody, Brandon? Or not?
You can come in. Cricket and. I'm surprised Walt's not here though. Cricket and Jeremy can go that way. But Walt's usually here on like spot on time.
Judy's usually here 15 minutes early.
Yeah.
you get one of these. Trying to be two places at once.
No. That doesn't really work, Judy. Really? Yeah.
Hi, you're cute.
Thanks. I went home and changed my clothes. I just drove in from Salt Lake City.
How's the baby?
Oh, he's a dream. I was running a little fever
Yes.
this morning. I'm a little big baby too. Yeah, I don't like that. Really sick. Oh.
I think it is. Summer? They promised fun and excitement if I
He's
came.
got his Hawaiian shirt on. I like it.
Fun and excitement. Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4 sisters.
Hi, Judy, Marcy, Stephen, and Bob. How are you guys?
Ready for fun and excitement.
Lainey said hi,
Who's
Stan.
missing? Who's calling?
Cricket and Jeremy are missing. Gavin's coming over.
Perfect.
The audience said that they provoked fun and excitement today.
I figured if you're part of the proceeding, Mark, you dress up.
Yes, he did.
Hi, Chris. You haven't had any living yet?
Uh-oh. Hi, Gavin. We got a voicemail. Hi, Gavin. It's voicemail.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, high mileage. What's wrong?
You should have got the extended warranty.
Is it being recorded?
It's,
No. There's no rush. I was just wondering, we could call him, because he's got, later on, I don't know.
Yeah, if somebody wanted to.
Here.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like we're plugging in at 12, so I told my call at 12. Just gonna shoot an email.
Where's,
Two places at once. That's the beauty of it. Yeah. They're one of my favorite kinds of animals. You do realize that, don't you? You're one of my favorite kind of animals.
I see.
oh, yeah, it's still.
We have the hearing too.
Love it.
Whatever you.
I haven't really looked at the minutes.
September.
I looked at the minutes. I found one thing wrong. I'm not sure where it was
That's
right now.
around that. Yeah. It's usually around September 20. Yeah.
It's the day after Talk Like a Pirate's Day.
Penny.
You got lemon drops.
I need that one right there.
Grandkids.
That's the difference.
You look up page 5.
7 to 9
7 to 9.
on page 5.
Number what?
We had a vote on the motion.
7 to 9?
Page 5 of 7 and 9. That's the only one I found. That should be 0. Yeah.
Look on the same page and see where it's bold, where it says the motion carried. Right before that, my last page.
Where? Chairman Stock's signature.
I actually drove.
What's wrong with it?
Huh? No, some stocks.
I have got my
Oh, your Stock's apostrophe. He just did this. Bryce just did this to his child.
Could not.
Brooks.
Couldn't.
Said,
The ER didn't have any remedy.
and possessed
It's a virus.
apostrophe.
It's a virus.
So, did we have Jeremy?
They should have played last night. We're waiting to get Kevin Anderson's help. No. They should be here first. They should be.
So, I just want to, hey, Brian,
You are?
so did
Still,
you send out any correspondence to your lawyers?
I had tea.
Hot water. Not too bad. It's mid-80s.
I have no idea.
Yeah, but here's something that big.
My wife got serious.
I mean, it's very possible that she did, probably did, knowing you she probably did.
I'll croak. I'll just keep the microphone really close.
No, I think,
Whispered.
She told us somebody was having surgery.
yeah, that's family member.
Somebody involved with
I think Tara might be working on that.
Oh,
I think she might be.
cricket.
Okay,
That's very important.
that's why she wasn't.
So I just emailed Gavin to see if he still wants me to call. I'll just wait for him to respond, but I can.
Okay. You just let me know when we're live and I'll go. Good. Alright. Should be. Alright, the time is 12:03. Today is Friday, July 26, 2019, and call to order the Grand County Change in Form of Government Study Committee meeting. If we would start by the Pledge of Allegiance, we're going to have Marcy Till lead us in that. Please stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Thank you. You may be seated. Next, we're going to move to the approval of the minutes. Everyone's had time to review the minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Bob, if he can tell us.
Yes. I'm just curious. The first motion listed, Judy, quotes you as saying you want to move item F to the immediacy. I don't know, that was kind of odd. I thought it was to first on the agenda. I've never heard that phrase before. Has anybody? No.
And we're old,
Yeah, we're old. We've heard a lot.
especially
On item
so we're
B,
changing immediacy
The
to
first item on the agenda.
yeah,
first item.
On next
Okay.
page.
B on page 2. I just thought it would be appropriate, since it was mentioned, and it is an issue of law, that in the third line said that 5 committee members participated paren, though there were never more than 3 at any one time. Close paren. Just, that was discussed, and it is important. I think I got a couple more, I'm sorry. And in I, at the bottom of page 5, Chairperson Stocks is quoted as saying, if the study committee chooses 5, the committee cannot recommend the 3-person commission. Is that what you said? What did you mean?
Say it one more time. What did I mean?
Yeah, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay,
I just wanted to note that if we were to pick a number greater than 3, then we inherently could not have the 3-member
Got it.
commission, although stating the obvious.
on page 6, in the second paragraph, I did not express support for financial savings with 5. I asserted that there would be financial savings with 5. As you'll remember, I didn't support 5. And then in the middle of page 7, K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, after that one-line paragraph, Chairman Stocks discussed separation of power. I would like it to be changed to reflect what I actually said, which is Bob expressed that commissions can change their salaries at any time. Utah is an at-will, period. Utah is an at-will state, allowing for the firing of the manager at any time, whereas commissioners can be fired only by the voters every 4 years, period.
Let me repeat that one back to you.
Yeah.
So Bob expressed that the expanded commissions can change their salaries at any time, and then period. He continued that Utah is an at-will state, allowing for firing of the manager at any time, whereas commissioners can be fired every 4 years by the voters.
Yeah, only every 4 years.
Only.
On page 9, these are really long minutes. It's not surprising that there's some.
4-hour meeting.
Yeah, that's brutal, Steve. On page 9, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, the last line, he expressed his current preference of 2 at-large and 3 from districts. Just a little transposition. On page 10E, again, it's quoting me, Bob suggested including information on study committee's extraordinary public input process.
Page 10E, second paragraph, second
Just
sentence.
adding the words
Bob
public
suggested
input.
public input.
And So may I make a motion to,
I think we have a couple more changes.
couple more changes?
Judy had one. I
On
think
page 5, we had a vote that was 7 to 9 in the motion, and it should be 7 to 0.
4 paragraphs
Oh,
down.
right, yes.
And Chairman Stocks' name has an apostrophe that doesn't need to be there. It should be after the S.
Third to last paragraph, we have possession on of S, a last name ending in an S. So it should be S comma or S apostrophe. Marcy can school us on that. Roll.
That was it.
Any other changes?
Move we adopt with the changes reported.
Bob has a motion that we adopt the minutes with the suggested changes. Brandy, do you have all the changes? Okay, perfect. And it's been seconded by Judy. All in favor of approving the minutes? 6-4, 0 against, 1 abstention. Mr. Day, who just arrived. Okay, that brings us now to general reports. Item B, report on response received from the Lieutenant Governor's office regarding whether the municipal election year of 2021 is possible for election of candidates into a new form of government. County Clerk Auditor Chris Baird. Yes.
I just received an email back from Gavin.
Perfect. Now would be a perfect time to call on them.
Do you want me to go ahead or wait?
Just wait one moment so we can get them on. Thank you.
Chris, I do think it's traditional for the county clerk to bring donuts when he speaks to this body.
It's traditional for you guys. Gavin Anderson for me.
Good afternoon, Mr.
I knew some
Anderson. This
tradition
is Stephen
involved there.
Stocks. We are
Hello, Gavin here.
into the meeting. We are on item B, report on response received from the Lieutenant Governor's office regarding the municipal election year 2021 is possible for election of candidates in a new form of government. County Clerk Auditor Chris Baird is about to give a presentation on this, or an update on this. That's where we're at. Okay?
Okay, so I'm going to report on 2 questions that were presented. I think it was
Mr. Anderson, can you hear County Clerk Auditor Mr. Baird?
Yes, I can hear fairly well.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So the first question that was asked was whether or not we could run the optional plan this year during the municipal election cycle, and they did agree that we could, even though there's some disagreement in code on the issue. The regular election code, Title 28, doesn't mention that it's an allowable reason for a special election, but 1752A does allow it. And so they said that they think, in their opinion, that we could. And I think you might be past that now anyway, but I just want to report on that. The second question is whether or not we could run the election of officers in a municipal cycle or a municipal general election. And the answer to that from the Lieutenant Governor's office is no, it doesn't appear so. There are no elements of state code that make that allowance. So the normal elections code, which is Title 20A and 1752A, the statute that governs changing government, both of them are in agreement that the only time that you can run an election of officers is during a regular general election, which is going to be even numbered years. So 2020 you could run the election of officers if you had passed the optional plan this year. But the next opportunity would be 2022, and they would take office in 2022.
Just, that's consistent with the opinion of our own county attorney and with our outside counsel, Mr. Gavin, as I understand it. And it does mean, incidentally, that if we elect to go with districts, that by the time we get around to electing officers, we will have the new census data.
So I did ask the staff of the Lieutenant Governor's office, if it was possible to, in the transition plan, do something different that was in state code. And he said, no, the transition plan must comply with state code. And so that option and of drafting some kind of midterm vacancy type election. You said wouldn't be non-compliant with code, but there's no provision that you can see anywhere that would allow you to do that transition. Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Anderson, any questions for Mr. Baird?
No, I discussed this at least by email with Chris, and had seen the communication from the Lieutenant Governor's office. I agree with it. There's a tiny little twist, and I would call it gambling or bluffing, and that is my experience both in the common law across the U.S. and in Utah case law. The courts are really, really very reluctant to overturn the wishes of the electorate in any kind of a voting or election situation. So I mentioned in one of my correspondence that there's a chance we felt strongly that we could bluff or gamble our way by putting something in the transition plan on the hopes, with both fingers crossed, that if it came to court, a court would give deference to the voters' wishes. I wouldn't recommend that. I only raised it as a possibility. There have been two situations in Utah, two district court litigations regarding Morgan County's plan, and those didn't go to appeal, so there's no reported decision. In both cases, the judge gave a lot of deference to the voter's choice. That was quite a bit different, though. Again, I don't think I would recommend a gambling or a bluffing kind of a situation. There's one other variable which I mentioned in my correspondence, and that's the possibility of going to the legislature next spring and see if the legislature will be willing to amend the existing law and permit an election of new candidates for the new offices of county government, either at a municipal election in November, or maybe even at primary elections. That's a little bit of a gamble. You never know what the legislature is going to do, but that's a possibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Baird, for your time.
You're welcome. Good meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Moving now to item C, report on breakdown by event location of number of surveys received. I don't know if Ruth had, it's just an attachment to our packet. Any discussion on this item that has been attached in our packet? Seeing no discussion, we would move on to community outreach and possible action. Item D, suggestions for additional public service announcements. Marcy?
I don't have anything at this time.
Okay. Any other discussion on
Can
that?
you speak into the microphone, Marcy? I couldn't hear you.
I don't have anything at this time.
Okay. Any other discussion on that item? No. Seeing none, we'll move to item E, suggestions for next newspaper editorial regarding the public engagement process. At this time, same boat. Any discussion on item E? Seeing none, we'll move on to citizens to be heard. Now is your opportunity to come forward. Speak everything that you'd like to speak. Normally we hold you to 3 minutes, but we haven't had much exciting input. So if you could, sir, before you start, because for it to be picked up on the microphone. If you could stand, if that's okay with you, sir. Perfect, thank you. And please state your name, sir.
My name is Mark Thomas, and I live on Palisade Avenue in Moab. My first thing I want to ask today is, has a decision definitively been made as to whether the recommended change in form of government will be on the ballot this fall or not be on the ballot this fall?
I don't think we can make the deadline.
There's no definitive at this point.
No, there's no definitive, but at this point, unless we move the plan extremely fast forward, like today, we don't have enough time by statute to get everybody their appropriate time to resolve it.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I'm just going to say that from my perspective, I would have recommended a 7-person council for the county government, but I understand why 5 is a reasonable compromise between 3 and 7. But I would just like to say that I believe that it should be a 5-person council rather than a 5-person commission. And I'll just read a statement from today's paper, Salt Lake Tribune, where they're going through a similar process in Utah County. And a commissioner there said, Commissioner Ivey said, there's a time and place for commissions, but that population growth and development in Utah County require a different form of government. Time to grow up, Ivey said. We're a growing county, and it's time for our government to be reflective of the needs of the people. And I think that Grand County, while not as large as Utah County or Salt Lake County, I think we're somewhat similar in our issues to a county like Summit County, where Park City is. And therefore, I believe that it's best at this point in time that we have a council where it has the legislative powers and the executive powers are placed in someone else. In my instance, I would recommend actually that if you have a 5-person council, that the executive official be appointed by the council rather than elected as a mayor or something similar. So I guess those are the things I just wanted to mention today. I can see going along with the compromise with the 5-person body of government. I would just like to see it be a council rather than a commission, and I would like to see the council appoint the executive rather than it be elected. And I just, to me, putting executive and legislative powers in the hands of a commission, to me, I think that doesn't provide enough checks and balances. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Anyone else out there that would like to share their mind?
Come on, Carrie.
Perfect. Seeing no other citizens to be heard, at this time, presentations, we have none. General business, action items, discussion items, and consideration of, we have nothing else on that one. Consent agenda action items. Item F, ratifying the chair's signature on a thank you letter to attorneys who provided proposals for legal services.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Since this body was unanimous in its expression of intent that such a letter be sent, I think this is superfluous at this time.
Okay. I think that we can resolve it without having anything else to be done on it. Okay. Looks good. Approved. Discussion items. G, elements to include an optional plan for county government. We have a extra item that has been added to our packet. It's item G. Does everyone have a copy of item G? Okay. Cricket and Jeremy. Once they have those now. Mr. Anderson, you can walk us through your packet. Everybody has a copy now.
You bet. Happy to do so. You're looking at the initial proposed outline for discussion only?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
At the top?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, let me thank the committee. This is fun for me. This is exciting. I don't know how many of you are fishermen, but if somebody offered to pay you to go fishing, that's kind of my situation. My hobby is county government. Proposed bill for retirement. So first of all, these are Roman numerals. Roman numeral 1, purpose and preamble. This is just a statement about, general statement about the process. It's a statement of intent that we're intending to create either this form of government or that form of government. It makes it clear that we're not changing any city powers or city status. You might be aware there are optional forms of government in the books that permit a city-county merger. I'm suggesting we just make it clear that that's not happening with this optional class. And then finally, there's just a couple of definitions, which I think we use just to make it easy to refer to specific matters.
Well, I'm curious, Gavin, this is Bob Greenberg, that you think it's prudent to define department even if we elect to recommend a council form of government, which would place the executive powers in the hands of either a mayor or a manager, who presumably would have the authority to organize the executive branch.
Yeah. Very good question. It's addressed later in this outline, and it really is a significant question that the committee's going to have to grapple with. That is, at what level or who gets to organize the executive branch. Some people say, well, that's strange that the legislative body would be able to organize the executive branch, but that happens at the state level, happens at the federal level more often than not. So that's a topic you'll have to decide. Just a couple of ideas on the potential options. One would be that the organization of departments is only by ordinance, which means that would be up to the legislative body. And anything smaller than a department, a division, or another agency might be up to the mayor's discretion. That again, the policy decision that you folks could address. And that shows up later in the outline.
Thank you, Gavin.
No other questions?
All right.
No. Actually, Walt has a question.
Hey, Gavin, just one quick question. You said the mayor, and just for
He means either one.
just to
probably.
understand, would you use the mayor interchangeably, whether they're appointed or elected, or are they different?
I probably ought to use the word executive
Okay.
to refer to either one. Mayor, is what we kind of use for an elected executive. Manager is one we use for typically use for an appointed executive. Maybe I could just use the word executive to refer to either of those, appointed or elected.
Thank you, that's it.
Other questions before we move on? Okay, we can move on to the next section.
Okay, page 2, section 2, general powers. This stuff sounds a little bit redundant or a little bit superfluous. What is helpful, I think, sometimes in adopting this kind of a document is making it clear that we understand as Grand County governing body exactly what our power and status is. This first line is some body corporate politics, little subdivision, state of government, general purpose government. Those are all kind of magic words that show up in Utah law that define what a county is and what it can do. And there's this 5-item laundry list of where's the source of Grand County's power under the new form of government. Under subparagraph capital B, it's just a recognition of the provision of county services does take place both inside and outside municipalities. The counties can create districts, create service areas, create local entities, all is provided by law, and that the governing body does have the authority to define or decide the level of services to be provided. Broad liberal interpretation of powers. Maybe I ought to take just a minute on that. In local government, there are two really important Supreme Court cases. One's called Dillon, and one's called Hutchinson. The Dillon case comes out of the Midwest, I think Illinois, and it was a case that said a local government's powers, whether it's a city or a county, are always limited, and they are limited to what is expressly given to them by the legislature. So, under this scenario, if you had a new problem come up, before you could act on it, you'd have to go to the legislature and get the statutory permission to act on that particular problem. In contrast is the other case, Hutchinson, that's the Utah case, 1977. And that case said we're doing away with the Dillon's rule in Utah. And we're assuming that a local government has broad powers to do young attorney for Salt Lake County when graffiti became a big problem. And there was a lot of interest in new graffiti ordinances. We wanted to punish graffiti artists. We wanted to clean up graffiti as quickly as possible, those kinds of things. Well, under Dillon's rule, we would probably have to go to the legislature and get a grant of authority to engage in graffiti amelioration, and so by ordinance. An example the other way around is a regulation of firearms. The Utah legislature has expressly limited any kind of regulation of firearms solely to the state. So local governments, cities and counties cannot regulate firearms. So if you were in a Hutchinson rule kind of a situation, as we are in Utah, then we would say, yes, we can engage in any kind of a government activity, something in the public interest, health, safety, welfare, without having to go to the legislature. But we can't do the things that the legislature says we can't do, which for instance, might be guns. We can't change election laws at local government level. So those sorts of things. So that statement at the bottom of page 2 is just a recognition. It doesn't create this law. It recognizes that this is an issue that Grand County has addressed, and we are adopting a Hutchinson rule kind of approach to local government power. So that's a lot of information. Are there questions on that?
Walt has a question.
Gavin, just up at under A, number 1, what is, I understand express authority, it's stated in the law. What is implied authority? From a law enforcement background, for me, we made it very clear you have no implied authority. You have specific authority or it doesn't exist.
Well, that's some language that actually comes from the Dillon case, the limited case. It said you can do whatever is expressly provided by the legislature or reasonably applied. So if, for instance, if you were a Dillon's rule kind of a jurisdiction, and there was a statute that said counties can regulate involuntary decoration of your house. Then you'd say, well, that means we've got the implied authority to regulate graffiti. So it's a term of art. Was that Walt?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Yeah, well, so it's a term of art, and it's something that kind of touches base with current legal principles regarding local government powers. And as I say, it really is probably already on the books in terms of it, even the conservative approach, the Dillon's rule approach. It's probably already exists for Grand County or for any other local government.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No other questions. We can move on to the next section.
All right, page 3, Roman numeral 3. So we've got Roman numeral 3, and over the page, Roman numeral 4 are separation out of legislative powers and executive powers. And that's assuming that if you go with the recommendation that there be a separation of powers for government. So that would be council with a separate executive. Roman numeral 3 is just the legislative power kind of explained, set out. Paragraph A is how many members. B, C, D, those are all just standard information. We would include how the chair is elected, duties of the chair and vice chair. Under the new law, you have to have partisan elections, so that's a given. Recognize there may be vacancies. We'd rather try and create any new law, which we probably couldn't do, recognizing that filling vacancies is by state law. And then there's 2 options of all council members all being elected at large or elected by district or a combination of both of those. come up with the terms. And for the first batch of elected officials, we ought to stagger those terms. The term starting on the first Monday of January, that's by statute. Council members elected by district, of course, they have to be a resident not only of the county, but of the district they're elected from. Again, the same idea of staggering initial terms. And we need to very carefully, if we do create districts, have to be very careful that the population be as equivalent as possible. There's a ton of federal laws on this, the one person, one vote rule. It requires that Grand County, both initially and during each reapportionment after census, do its very best to make the populations of the districts exactly equal. Now, there is some wiggle room on exactly equal. And if we want to discuss that in more depth, I would be happy to do that.
Just FYI, Gavin, this is Bob Greenberg. For your information, we had a fairly extensive presentation last week by an expert on districting. So we're somewhat familiar with this issue.
Okay, good. I'm also got a little one-page summary if you're interested. I think I've already given that to Christina, but it's a pretty well settled law. It makes some sense. It's only a little bit confusing in that some of the federal cases seem to give you a lot of wiggle room, and other federal cases give you a little bit of wiggle room. My recommendation would be that you come as close as possible to exactly equivalent population. Okay, here's the page 4. Removal of office against survived by statute, vacancies, resignations, compensation and benefits. The initial compensation level would probably be set out in the optional plan. Recognition that compensation would change over the years. The provision about no reduction during a person's term, that's by state law. There's a prohibition on that. Reference to staff manager. Now this would not be the county administrator, the county executive, but this would be a person who was appointed just to be an assistant, administrative assistant for the council itself. This would be a person who would be a member of the legislative branch. You know, that's an option. That's not necessary that you do that. We set out just some standard language about voting procedures, extensions, what kind of votes require a supermajority. That's used to set up the statute. Item K, if you have an elected county executive, then veto is possible. And so in this recitation of what the legislative body does and doesn't do, we want to have a provision about how to handle vetoes, what kind of deadlines there are regarding veto, and then the council's veto override. Just some materials, L and M are kind of self-explanatory. Then I recommend that we include a fairly comprehensive list, a laundry list of all the different kinds of things that a legislative body does. These kind of lists are set out in statute, and you already have some, I think, in Grand County ordinance. But the two big jobs of the legislative branch is to enact laws and go through the budget process, set taxes, set fees. So it's power to enact laws and the power to empower the person. There's other things. The legislative body in Utah can conduct investigations into county activities, county money, county books. Legislative bodies have quasi-judicial hearings, like land use appeals and those kinds of things. They advise and consent to executive branch appointments. That's another question we're going to have to look at in detail as to how much, what kinds of appointments the council would have advice and consent authority. They create districts on and off there with that. Some of those with Grand County, that's just my fevered imagination, if we can do that or not. And then there's an option that shows up occasionally in optional plans. If you create a separation of powers, the county council, with a separate county manager, county exec, it's difficult to say the council can't call up the division director of road maintenance and say, I want you to fix this pothole with such and such an address. And so that's a separation of powers issue, and that the legislative body cannot engage in any kind of direct interference with executive branch activities or employees, except as part of their legislative authority, setting budgets, enacting ordinances. So they would do that in an open meeting pursuant to their legal authority. So that's it for legislative branch activities. Any questions?
No questions. We can move on to the next section.
I made this so big, I put lots of white spaces and double spaces on the theory that there'd be a lot of interlineations and ideas and rewrites.
I do have a question for you. At this point, we're just kind of glazing over it, understanding that eventually we'll talk in detail to these things. So I'm withholding some of my questions for that reason, because I think for the purpose, it's just for us to kind of get refreshed with the document. That's my understanding, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I'll try and be down in person for your next meeting, and that'll give you a week to go through this with a little more care, and at that point we can start talking about answers to options. Rewrites, things like that.
Excellent.
All right, so page 6, we've got Roman numeral 4, this is executive branch. So there are the options: an elected executive, we'll call him the mayor, or her the mayor, appointed manager, commission form, of course, the executive powers merge with the legislative powers, so that would mean quite a different way of writing section Roman numeral 3 and 4. So the chief executive of Grant County, there's your options. Person's elected at large, partisan election, qualifications. Most of these qualifications are going to be set by statute. Removal, vacancies, resignations, some prohibitions, and compensation and benefits. Those are quite a bit similar to what we've already talked about with the legislative body. Paragraph B, B1, we need to make it clear that the executive doesn't have any authority over the independent elected officials, sheriff, clerk, recorder, attorney, auditor, and that is mandatory by state law. Another laundry list of executive activities, actions, responsibilities. Basically, the executive is the manager, directs the work and activities of the county, oversees departments, does what the council tells it to do, tells the executive branch to do, usually by ordinance, sometimes by budget. Advice and consent again, controlling assets and conducting investigations. This, similar to the legislative branch, the executive branch also has the power under state law to conduct investigations into county activities, county money, misconduct, those kinds of things. Prepare a budget. I probably need to emphasize that a little bit more. There are options under state law as to which office prepares the proposed budget. Obviously, the budget is eventually reviewed and approved by the legislative body, but the preparation of the budget is an important part of that, and that can be under law. It can be either done by the executive or done by the auditor's office. So I need to make a note to make it clear that that's another decision that you'll need to make. Again, you have a veto power, but the veto power is limited only if the executive is elected. There's a little provision on appointment of executive staff. Most of the elected executives, which includes the independent elected, the mayor in Salt Lake County at least, and the mayor in Cass County, they have appointed deputies. And the deputy is a particularly by statute. It's the role that allows the deputy to come in during the executive elected official's disability or absence or whatever, and have the authority to conduct county business. It's not mandatory. It's probably a good idea, but that's something you can consider, including what kind of qualifications that deputy would have. Deputies are appointed only for elected officials. Okay, here's a big deal on the Commission form of government, and it's the question of how does executive activities performed in a county commission form of government. And it's tied a little bit to the question of whether the county commissioners are full-time or part-time. And that's the idea that in some counties, the county commission, each of the 3 commissioners is actually a department head for those government functions that are not undertaken by the 8 independent elected officials. For instance, one might be the department head over public works, the kinds of activities public works would include roads, street maintenance, curb gutter sidewalk, animal services, whatever kinds of things need to fit together is a public works kind of situation, planning, zoning. Another department might be internal administrative services of the county, so that would be things like HR, IT, purchasing, those kinds of divisions and departments that provide service to the county. A third one could be something dealing with parks and public facilities and management of libraries or fine arts kinds of facilities. That's completely open. You've got 2 options. One is to either try and spell that out in the optional plan, or leave that to the new county council or new county commission to spell that out. And what you probably ought to spell out in the optional plan is whether you want to have county commissioners, if you go with a county commission system, actually managing county departments. That's probably not it's not required. An option is, even if you have a elected county commission, you can still obviously have department directors, you can have a commission, a county administrator that helps that kind of management situation. That's really pretty optional. If a county commissioner ends up being department head, then that probably argues for full-time status, probably different compensation. So that's a really fairly significant option you're going to have to address if you go with a county commission form of government.
Mr. Anderson, that portion that you mentioned about having directed departments, could that be mandated within our code? Any question?
Yes, I think you could certainly mandate that you could probably either mandate it, permit it, or prohibit it in the optional plan.
And that's our...
That becomes a pretty significant responsibility for you folks.
And the rest of the folks, this study committee can correct me, that's our current form of government, that we have department heads.
What is the question he's answering? Can we write in a mandatory?
Yes, that the commissioners would be department heads. Mr. Greenberg?
Yeah. Gavin, excuse me, when Judy and I called you earlier, a couple of months ago actually, we specifically asked whether or not the ordinance could require a commission to have an administrator. And I understood your response to be different than what you're saying right now. Can you... Well, my understanding was... My understanding...
I think there's some options to it either way. Maybe it'd be more accurate to say it would be unusual to have the commission have an appointed manager, just because, as we've been talking, that's how you distinguish a county commission, is they have
we are Grand County, so we're used to being unusual.
I have a question.
Judy Carmichael has a question for you, Mr. Anderson.
Gavin, is there anything, if we put that in this document, is there anything to prevent them from changing it the minute we, the commission has it? Does it have the right to change it and say, no, one of us is going to be the administrator?
Yes, there's a state statute that governs how you can amend a county optional plan. And it's got a couple of limitations. One of the limitations is the county council or the county commission cannot change the distribution of executive and legislative branch authority. There's some other limitations. They can't change part-time county council to a full-time county council and vice versa. And the only way they can make those changes, I call them above-the-line changes, significant changes in the structure of the government, they can only make above-the-line changes if there's an election and the vote of the people. If it's a below-the-line thing, like you want to change the way the council chairperson is picked, then that doesn't require a vote of the people. I think it requires a supermajority. I'd have to look that up. So there is a way to change this, that's true.
So again, let me.
Bob.
I'm not sure the answer to that is if you have a county commission form of government, can the commissioners change a provision regarding county manager or commission manager? Because would that be considered a change in the distribution of executive legislative branch powers that could only be accomplished by a vote of the people? We have to give some thought to that one. That's a little more difficult question.
So it's theoretically possible then that we could keep our same form of government but inform the public that we've always had a commission instead of a council.
Maybe.
Possibly.
I've long believed, there's a lot of people that believe that Morgan County, Grand County form of governments are really just expanded county commissions. I've heard the UAC discuss that. And there's a couple of options where you could create a form of government, a new form of government, which is very similar to the current form you've got. And that could be either a council form with an appointed county manager or a commission form with an appointed county manager. I was going to say something brilliant. Anyway, my mind got blank. It'll come back.
We've got one more question with Walt. Walt has a question for you, and then Bob has a question.
Yeah, Gavin, I do not understand if you had a 5-person council with an appointed administrator, or you had a 5-person county commission with an appointed administrator, what would be the difference?
Executive authority.
That's a good question. The difference is, where does the ultimate executive branch power lie? That's a fairly significant question. It entails that question, that issue I mentioned earlier. You might include a prohibition on the legislative body interfering with the executive branch. If you have a county commission, whether they've got appointed manager or not, they obviously, there can not be a prohibition against them being involved in executive branch activities. So the idea is if you have county commissioners with a county manager of some kind,
The mess.
that the county commissioners retain the ultimate legal authority over executive branch activities.
Well,
That would be, inherent in that idea would be that a county commissioner could override a decision by an appointed county manager, commission manager, and tell them, no, we're not going to do it this way, we're going to do it that way. The same would not be true if you have a county council form of government with an appointed manager. In that case, the county council members cannot tell the county manager either do this or don't do this, except through the budget process or through adopting an ordinance.
Walt had a follow. Yeah, and then Walt had a follow-up, I think, for clarification.
I think that clarified it well, but in the case of say the appointed manager with a council, how does the manager and the council interact? Does the communication can't be from 5 council members to that appointed manager? Does it go through the chairperson?
It's the idea that the council, if it's a separation of powers from government, the council can only give direction to the executive branch through the council's legal authority. That is, the authority to either adopt an ordinance or to set a budget. So the way a council would influence the activities of an appointed executive would be to pass an ordinance that said, we used to do purchasing this way, now we're going to do purchasing that way. And so the appointed executive would be required to follow that new ordinance. Another way would be through controlling the budget. The county legislative body could adopt a budget that provided for funding a certain activity or not funding a certain activity. And that would obviously have an influence, sometimes a very big influence, over how the county appointed executive did his or her work.
Bob has a question for you.
Yes, in 4B2, in regard to preparation of a budget, Grand County, as in so many other ways, is an odd duck here. We have empowered a committee to prepare and recommend a budget to the council. Could we specify that in ordinance?
That may be a problem. There is a specific state statute, the County Fiscal Procedures Act, that requires that budget preparation is done either by an executive or by the auditor. There's the county commission could certainly have a committee that put together and recommended a budget. But I think that one might be a little bit out of the way.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this section? No other questions on this section.
Okay, I just marked D on page 7 as being a fairly important. Roman 5, starting on page 8. This is just some general provisions about the structure of county government, departments, divisions, offices, things like that. There are 2 options that you'll need to address. So, of course, the executive branch organization is under the executive's direction. The structure of departments will be set by county ordinance. Now, this is where another fairly significant decision for you folks to make. At what level does the county legislative body control the creation of the executive branch structure? It would probably be fairly common for the creation of department level subdivisions to be done by ordinance. But the smaller subparts, like divisions, other sections or agencies, might either be created by the executive or by ordinance. So that's something, in order to avoid future arguments, maybe future lawsuits, that's something that really has to be spelled out fairly carefully in the optional plan. Provision, of course, that departments and divisions are led by qualified directors. You have an option, or you can be merit exempt. In a few minutes, we'll talk about merit exempt for all county employees. But you've got that question about department directors. You've also got the question about at what level is their advice and consent by the county legislative body. We just recite the fact that we're recognizing that these other officers, sheriff, clerk, auditor, that their duties are not set by the county. Their duties are set by county or by state statute, and they're not under the supervision of either the executive or the legislative body. Except, there's an except that's a little bit squishy. There is ultimate supervision in regarding what's called in the statute administrative matters. Doesn't kinds of things, countywide administrative matters. And that would be things like if the county council adopted a travel policy, or a tuition reimbursement policy, or a requirement that all employees wear seatbelts or not use cell phones while they're in a car. Those are the kinds of overall administrative things that probably would be binding on the independent electeds. The other things that are obviously binding on the independent electeds are their budgets. And those budgets are clearly, I mean, a legislative branch activity where the legislative branch passes a budget that's going to include budget allocations for the sheriff, and for the attorney, and for the other independent elected officials. So there is always ultimate supervision, and again, it's another kind of a brand of separation of powers and checks and balances. Item 5, I don't know how you do this now, but there are some functions that are spelled out in state statute, and in larger counties they're done by administrative departments or divisions of county government. In the smaller counties, they're usually undertaken by one of the other elected officials. So you need to provide that there's an HR division, that you need to have a purchasing system, and you have to appoint a purchasing agent. That's the person that's spelled out in state statute. And then you have to have a grandma records archives person. Imagine, I think Chris Baird, does some of these things as a county clerk, but that's something that you would have to spell out in the statute, or I mean in the optional plan.
Bob has a question for you.
Yeah, Gavin. So in 4, it says duties are set by state law, but in 5, it says what county office can perform these functions. So am I correct in assuming that while a council or commission could not take statutory authority away from elected officials, they could give additional tasks or authority to them? For instance, we now have HR in the county attorney's office.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's a kind of a delicate balance. That's a second balance. I think if you said, county attorney, we want you to handle HR, the county attorney could probably say no.
Okay.
But number one, if you spell it out in the optional plan, that gives you a little more imprimatur, if you will. And typically, like I say, this happens in almost all the smaller counties. These functions are performed by one of the elected officers. You know, there's agreement, there's willingness for the elected officer to take on those extra responsibilities.
So you can't force them, but you can ask them.
It's a little bit squishy, and it kind of becomes a matter of how you work it out.
Thank you.
When I talk about duties in paragraph 4, that's referring to like the statutory duty of the sheriff to go out and arrest people.
Right.
Or to run a jail. It's the statutory duty of an elected county attorney to perform criminal prosecution, those kinds of things. So those kinds of, you call them, professional kinds of duties. Council and the elected, or the county executive can't interfere with those. Those are clearly independent of direction by either the legislative body or the executive body, except, as I said, for the adoption of ordinances and the setting of a budget. Questions?
No questions.
Okay, over page 9, I think we're getting close to done. B is just a reference to those independent elected officials. You do have an option under the optional form of the county government to consolidate elected offices. If you don't do it in the optional plan, it can be done under other circumstances. So that might be something that comes up. Paragraph C is the personnel system, the HR system. Council and commission really needs to adopt a pretty comprehensive set of ordinances and regulations regarding how the personnel system works. Is it a merit system? Is it at will? There is a statutory scheme called the and it's permissible, not required, but it's permissible to have a separate merit system for the sheriff's office. So those are some important questions to give thought to. Paragraph 2 is another important issue. It's set out by state statute, and it maybe doesn't need to be in the optional plan. You can maybe just do it by ordinance. But state statute says the county legislative body has to sign off on hires. And there's 3 different levels that can be done. Depending on, obviously, on the size of the county. The closest scrutiny is to have the county legislative body approve each individual as they're hired. The next level of scrutiny would be to have the county council approve the personnel allocations to each office or department. In other words, if the sheriff has 25 allocations for deputies, then he can't have 26 deputies. And the least scrutiny is having the county council say, we're only going to approve the personnel budget for each office or department. So back to the sheriff, if the sheriff was given a personnel budget of $2.5 million, then he or she could either have fewer deputies with higher salaries, more deputies with lower salaries. That would leave quite a bit more discretion with the independent elected officials. And then prohibitions on politicking in the county workplace. And that's that for that section.
Looks like no questions.
Page 7. So this is what we call the transition plan, and this is just the way we prepare. Paragraph A is about the way the current county council prepares to make this transition happen smoothly. Clearly, the current county council could enact ordinances that would help in the transition process. They could transfer assets or people back and forth as it looks like would be appropriate under the new plan. And they would do that in accordance with the provisions of the new plan. Paragraph 2 is something you have to think about. And I think you've asked this question before. I seem to remember it coming up. And that is what you do with a current county council member whose term is cut short by the adoption date of the new optional plan. I think you've got some different approaches to that you might want to follow. In Salt Lake County, when we did that, we got rid of the county commission system. There was one county commissioner whose term was cut in half. And in our optional plan, we said if that happens with a county commissioner, then the commissioner gets the remaining 2 years of salary that he or she would have gotten as she stayed in office. That's not required by the law. That's something you'd have to decide how you'd like to do that. There could be a lump sum separation payment or just nothing. And then you have to give some thought to what happens if that council member whose term is cut in half ends up somewhere in the form of government.
Mr. Anderson, Bob has a question for you.
Yeah, Gavin, could we just as easily extend existing council members' terms if we chose to, instead of cutting them short? That was done when the state decided to stagger the elected officials' terms. They extended for 2 of the terms, recorder and treasurer, to 6 years to accomplish that.
It won't affect the independent electeds. It won't
Right, no, but
the members of the current county council.
right, but could we extend terms rather than cut them short?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, here's the problem. If you've got a current county council member and he or she, well, here's something else you can do, perhaps. Perhaps you could, if you create a county council system, you could provide that a currently elected county council member whose term would be cut short would have the option of taking that seat without having to run for it.
Right.
My guess is that would not be terribly popular, but I think that would probably be legal.
Okay, So we have pretty much a free hand there.
You've got a lot of wiggle room here, so that's an important decision to make. In paragraph B, we start to talk about the effective dates, and that effective date of when the new form of government takes place is going to be depending on when we elect the new officers. If we have to wait till 2022, then obviously that's a ways down the road, but we do need to spell out when that adoption will take place and get the effective date. So, what I've done over on the top of page 11, paragraph 2, it suggested that in the optional plan, we might want to put a contingency regarding that date in case, number one, if you decide to go to the legislature and get them to change the date, and number two, that the legislature actually does it in a reasonable way. I thought we might want to include a contingency provision saying that if we go to the legislature and they allow us to have the election of officers in, say, the primary election in 2021, something like that, or in the municipal election 2021, that would allow the current county council to change the effective date based on new elections. That's obviously clearly up to you. You may decide you don't even want to go to the legislature and try and pursue that. Paragraph C just talks about by changing this, we're not having any effect on ongoing activities. You know, if there's a planning and zoning appeal going on, that doesn't mean it all goes away. There's current contracts or bonds, this doesn't change those at all. There's kind of a provision. D, we ask for cooperation of all county officers and employees. E, we say amended the courts and state statute, and F, provide a separability provision that just says if somebody takes us to court over one of the paragraphs in the optional plan, that would not affect the other paragraph. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a great start.
So would you like to discuss this when you come here in person? Maybe we can look at kind of items more specifically, or do we want to look at putting it 2 weeks out?
I think that would get to
2 weeks.
Chair as to how you'd like to handle this. I plan to come down next week in person. I'd be happy to take all the notes and prepare the revised optional plan outline. Or you can have people email me in the interim. Why don't you discuss that about how you'd like best to do that?
And I think my preference would be that you'd be here in person when we go through some of these items, but the problem is our next decisions, I think, would make a lot of the work, reduce a lot of the work that we'd have to do. So I think maybe at this time we'd hold off on putting it on the next agenda, but I think it'd be critical for you to come down. How many next meetings? I don't know if Ruth shared with you our calendar of dates, but I didn't know.
I've seen the calendar. I could probably come down maybe twice a month, maybe more. Depends on what my weekend look like. You always meet on Friday at noon, right?
Yes.
Okay. My intent would be to come down at least twice in August, depending on how much traction we get and how far along we get in cleaning up the outline.
Do you want them down here then next week?
And then within a couple of weeks, when we get the outline set down, then I can start to work on an initial draft or rough draft of the actual plan.
And I know.
Maybe able to have that to you in August.
And I know you've been very generous offering to drive down. I just don't want to have you come down multiple times if it's not needless. I'm just kind of trying to think out loud if we want him here next week, because I don't know if we would be ready to go through concrete terms of this. I'm just trying to make it the most convenient.
By next week, the question is
Make
whether
that-
you folks will be ready.
Can we make that decision at the end of this meeting?
Okay.
Take notes. You're the one that has to do the thinking.
I just didn't know if you wanted to come all the way down just to take notes.
You know,
Yeah, when you could be there on the phone. That's what I'm trying to say, because you've been very generous with driving down here. I just want to be respectful of your time as well.
No, I understand. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I told both Chris and Ruth that I quite enjoy the drive, and I think my boss can allow me to charge you only 1 hour for the trip down and back, on the theory that I'll probably be listening to a book on tape rather than working on Grand County issues.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to it. I think I could speak for everybody that we're really excited you're here, and it shows that we've made the right choice by the work and effort that you've already put into this, and
Absolutely.
we're very grateful.
Yeah. Feel very confident.
Can I ask this? Have you gotten very close to, have you made a final decision on which option to go with? Or are you getting close?
That is on the agenda today. So I think, I might be thinking out loud again. I think maybe somebody will make a motion to do a brief recess so we can kind of clear our heads for a moment. And then we will come back with deciding on districts at large or a combination of both. And also after that, our next item is discussing the 4 forums. So I think it would be beneficial if you could remain on. I don't know if your schedule permits that.
Right now?
If possible, in the next 30 minutes, we'll probably be on form of government. I don't know if you wanted to stay on for that, but.
Yeah, I'd be happy to stay on if you'll permit me.
Perfect, we would like that. Marcy had a question. I don't know if it's for you.
Gavin, it's Marcy Till. I just, I would like to reiterate my gratitude for this outline, because this actually is the first sense I've actually thought about the depth of the thought and the work that has to go into creating our optional plan that is going to serve the needs of our citizen in the form of government that we choose. Anyway, thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. I enjoy this kind of thing. Just between you folks and me, I wish we'd had this ready 2 months ago. We could easily get the plan on the ballot this fall. But it is what it is, and we'll make it work.
Excellent. So we're going to take 10 minutes maybe. I don't know if you just want to mute the line, or we can call you back, whatever is most convenient for you, sir.
I'll just stay on the line, and I'll probably go get my lunch too.
Excellent. So do we have a motion to recess for 10 minutes? Got a motion, seconded by Walt. All in favor? Aye.
That gum cricket.
Cricket has brought veggies and snacks.
This is the fun and excitement. That's beautiful.
Very interesting. Bob did. And then Walt seconded.
And it was unanimous.
I'll
take one.
And the decisions that we make, and the order that we actually have to make. I don't have, I never thought about scissors or something that was bad. Don't use your juices.
This is great. I think the one thing that's going to be interesting is transition. But we're not speaking about this.
We're not speaking about this. It's like the Jedi mind.
Right? I love it.
Your shoulder bothering you?
Yes, ma'am.
What's wrong with it?
Mm.
Call.
I have a torn rotator cuff.
Well, I'll,
It's a slight tear, but I slept on it wrong 3 days ago, and I woke up last night and I was completely frozen. Like, all
and
my
I'm not
neck,
trying to buy
everything.
favor, it's
So,
just, sure. I bring it
ran
up.
in, got a cortisone shot, they twisted it, massaged it. Yeah, I did that this morning. But with Jim.
I liked you.
I do too, but
We can't get into it.
what do you reckon? Yeah, one size fits all. She was
I just think she's very smart.
Because it was just an emergency, which is you just call them. I get it.
So are they calling it frozen shoulder?
I had, yeah, so, the shoulder. And they're like, yeah, and they told me, he says, you're losing weight. And one of the things the doctor said.
All right, wait a minute. You're losing muscle mass.
He goes, you're losing weight. He goes, you're losing fat that actually has kept your muscle kind of in the same position. It's all adjusted. And he says, and when you're doing that, you're sleeping different than you've ever slept. You're walking different than you've ever walked. And he goes, you're going to have some adjustments until you. And then he told me,
You're too young for this kind of stuff.
you know, I was dumb though. That was my problem. Is that through my early 20s, I just did stupid things that
Well,
ended
you
up
can't
getting hurt.
you can't tell a 20-something that they're not
No,
going to be able
it's
to
the
do
truth,
that stuff
right?
the
And
rest of their lives,
now
right?
I'm like, oh, yeah.
This is how you encourage citizens to be heard.
Well, I'm sorry.
We bring food for citizens to be heard. If you come to our meeting and you've been heard, you get to have some
You get that straight.
some treats.
Everybody's gonna wanna be heard.
Yeah, thank you, Cricket.
It's a great committee, and I am very proud of the way this committee conducts. We're nice folks.
And I am older than I do.
We try.
I know executive government, real story.
I've been referred to it.
No.
So far.
I'm proud of you. Your mama had a hard week, didn't she? She did. Boy, losing your baby stuff.
Well, my dad died on the 19th, and my sister died on the 24th. This is
Of this month. Yeah, tough month for them. Yeah,
My dad died on, well, actually, my dad probably died on July 20th, but that was my mom's birthday. So I asked the coroner to put it the 19th, so my mom's birthday would be on my dad's birthday.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
So my mom's birthday, well, it was definitely with them.
Absolutely, I'm excited.
Yeah.
He's still around, isn't he? Who? Sheldon's still around, isn't he?
Yeah, I just saw him. He did the.
You know,
He did
a
Jay
person
Marshall's.
gets, I love
How old was
Girl
she?
did Jay Marshall's.
I love the picture of the three of you girls as teenagers. So,
Well, I'm having
I know, but my
a
gosh,
galaxy far, far away.
yeah. Well, it's a cute picture. It would be a really cute picture. He loves me.
Are you camping now, Mark?
Well, I'm gonna tell you how
This week we're
important,
going
I think.
Grand Canyon, Canab, and Escalante.
How what?
3 days in the
how
back
important
here.
this is. I'm gonna-
Grand Canyon, my friend Gigi Love is gonna be singing in the Grand Canyon Saturday night.
Off the mountain.
So,
At the hotel?
I've been driving.
Outdoor amplifier.
Salt Lake
Ah.
City,
We have to do, we have to do.
Oh, really? What are you doing in Salt Lake?
We're gonna go listen to her, night with her Sunday morning.
Because I know
We go to Canab.
what I was trying to be thinking of for everybody.
Canab. But Sunday night in Canab. Monday night, they have the new Everett Bruce movies coming out. And they're playing it in 3 places, Escalante, Moab, and Salt Lake City. And I can only see it at Escalante.
They don't know what happened to him, do they?
I didn't hear it in the news.
Sure.
No, for a second. But
Yeah, well, and I,
French filmmaker just got a new documentary out.
It is 8 hours.
in the new theory,
Even though
Everett Bruce.
you volunteer to do not necessarily.
There's gonna be 3 screenings in English in Utah. One in Escalante, Moab is the 4th,
It would be so
August
easy to
4th,
work down.
Oh, wow.
and Salt Lake City's the 13th.
And then, yeah, so I'm definitely.
Thanks. Cricket,
I do. I'm,
Well, after
I think-
last
I
time,
think that-
the
I think we
sweets
should
were
make
so
some
sweet that I was
decisions
like,
going
okay, I can't do
forward
that
so
again.
that
They were very good.
What a concept.
Yeah, they were very good for there.
See, Jeremy can join us with this.
Right?
That's one of the reasons.
He
why I
likes
did
me,
that.
that boy.
Reggie's.
Oh, I love them.
He thinks I'm crazy though, so it's.
That isn't a hardship.
He's right.
I went to buy grapes, I got
Veggies
like
and
3 bowl of
protein is
grapes,
my-
and then the meat and cheese, and I thought,
my
yeah, I
go-to.
can't wash it.
It,
So
well,
I'm gonna buy
it works for
some
me.
Sugar.
It works for me. But
I didn't eat that before I got here. I was at PT.
Well, I hurried and went there, and I had 10 minutes to get there, get this and get that. It was crazy. I should've left early. But I was only like 5 minutes late, so I was okay. They have stuff you can
Yes, ma'am. A little salami, a little cheese, some carrots, some cauliflower, broccoli. I'm good. This is lunch.
I've never seen someone serve cheese before 50 minutes running it.
That thing settled down at all?
Look, like work? Yeah. You know,
The employee
it's
stuff?
the dog days of summer right now. It's so hot.
Yeah.
But I'm still doing over 100 rooms a day. So, it's, yeah. If you're price sensitive, there's 2 times to come to Moab. When
Winter.
it's too cold, or when it's too hot.
I
There
love
is-
the winter in Moab. I don't know.
there
That's
is
why I live here.
nothing, too cold is not not a bad thing.
No, I agree. If you're hiking, especially if you're walking around.
Well, I don't think that Moab's that cold. We
So-
don't get enough snow for it to be
The other night,
that miserable.
I had my first ever almost wrecked.
Really?
Lady almost hit me.
Really? Where she was driving, or, yeah?
You had your first ever what?
Almost wrecked.
Almost wrecked.
Oh!
In your side by side?
Because what I do is there's a spot, you go up over it, bump over the
Mhm.
and I wait till everybody's lined up perfectly, everybody's in a straight line, which means all they gotta do is follow me.
Mhm.
I waited patiently, took a few minutes for everybody to get lined, and I went up over the top, and I rested on top, and I looked back. The lady in the behind me, instead of just coming up, she went, oh, like this, like this. I thought I was gonna tip on this side, and I've got my hand up. I'm like, you're not on line, stop. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And she floored it. She almost tipped over this way, and then came around and almost hit me. How about you? Wasn't that far. I cussed. You didn't fall. You. Because you know what? When she did that, she almost hit me. She almost hurt herself, hurt her daughter.
This is
She
one
almost
of your
hit me.
clients?
And then everybody behind her could have followed her around.
Yeah,
Which
that's
meant I
the,
could have had it happen 3 times. Right. And all the time that I've done it, that's the closest I've ever
that's the
come.
first time?
Uh-huh.
That's surprising, honestly.
That's good. You're 30 now too.
We
Yeah.
watch them
Pretty
all the
good.
time. We watch them so close, but,
Mhm.
and I told her, she goes, why, first she told me, I thought you said go, not whoa. And I go, I have my hand.
Are you ready?
And she says, well, I couldn't hear you.
Yeehaw, yeehaw.
I said, well, you're changing your story. But anyway,
Thank
then
you,
she
by the
apologized
way.
for that, which was the worst part.
The time is 1:29. It's Friday, July 26, 2019. We're returning from recess for the Grand County Change in Form of Government Study Committee meeting. Mr. Anderson, are you here on the phone with us again? He went to get his lunch. Perfect. So we're moving now. Any other discussion regarding item G?
Wow.
Huh? None? Perfect. Moving now to discussion and possible action on study strategy. Item H, recommending voting by district or at large, or a combination of both, postponed from July 19th, 2019. So just, yes. Bob, sorry.
Re-strategy on
Re-
this item,
Perfect, re-strategy.
if I may. I've thought a lot about our discussion last week and the committee's interest in some combination of districts and at large. And I know there are differences of view in that. And I think right now, most of our views are formed in somewhat of a vacuum. One of the things that Mr. Cooper mentioned when we asked him about how he actually went about drawing districts other than the purely numerical approach, he said he often sat down with the planning departments in the entity for which he was drawing districts to get their advice on whether or not there were neighborhoods or communities of interest that ought to be, that he ought to attempt not to split up. And, you know, we're all aware of the split in our state representatives districts, which is kind of frustrating and silly for many of us. But at any rate, so I took it upon myself to go sit down with our county planner and discuss with him, brainstorm with him what ideas he might have for things that he would bring up in a discussion like that. And he had a bunch of ideas, and he, including looking at the high density overlay in terms of looking at parcel size, the distribution of primary residences versus second homes in various neighborhoods, possibly the age of the housing stock, the transportation corridors in the county, property values. And in talking with him, I thought it would be prudent for us to continue to inform ourselves on this issue. And my suggestion would be to convene a one-time work group consisting of the city planner, the county planner, and Mr. Cooper to come up with a better recommendation on both a 2-district plan and a 3-district plan, because I think my guess is that those are the only possible options that we're looking at based on our earlier discussion, and then bring that back to us. I think there's no question Mr. Cooper is available. The county planner is available in the early part of August. I think it's worth our while to at least look that much more closely at the possibilities before we make a decision on what to recommend. So having said all that, I would like to put that in the form of a motion if that's in order.
So you'd like to make a motion to create
a one-time workshop consisting of Mr. Cooper, Mr. Levine, and Ms. Shepherd to provide recommendations on what other variables other than purely numbers should be considered in drawing 2 or 3 districts, and to recommend districts based on that to the council, to the commission. I would assume that would have to be in mid-August.
Okay, so at this time we have a motion to create a one-time workshop consisting of the city planner, county planner, and Mr. Cooper, also known as Mr. Levine, Ms. Shepherd, and Mr. Cooper, to provide recommendation on other variables to consider when determining how to draw districts, and provide a report back to this study committee.
Including proposed districts based on their recommendations.
Including proposed districts. That is the motion that's before us. Do we have a second? There is no second. Moving on to the discussion overall, we're still on recommending voting by district at large or a combination of both, postponed from July 19th, 2019. Last we discussed was talking about the different forms, the different district options, 3 at large with 2 separate districts. We've also heard about having 3 districts, 2 at large. That's kind of where we're at right now. Mr. Anderson, have you caught everything so far? Just want to make sure you're with us.
Yes, I am. I've been listening up.
Perfect. Anyone have any thoughts?
Well, you've heard my thoughts.
Walt?
Well, just not a specific thought other than I liked Mr. Cooper's presentation in that if we do districts, they can be drawn very objectively. And I personally get concerned when we start putting overlays on districts that are subjective. And I can't tell you how many at every single one of the open houses people said, if we go with districts, how do you assure us that they won't be played with? And I'm not suggesting that that's what Bob is suggesting at all. I'm just saying that anything we do that's not kind of computer generated and based on population in that area is going to be subject to somebody challenging. And so that's why I didn't do a second or something. I just when you start talking about neighborhoods, whose neighborhood, where does neighborhood start and end, or socioeconomic or anything else, I just think trying to explain something other than straightforward and simple to anybody is going to be a tough sell that won't put some skepticism into the process.
Jeremy?
I've taken a lot of time to think and put my feels out there and kind of think about what we talked about last meeting. And with that being said, I really see the merit and the potential based on the needs of our community with a district that we talked about last week that was primarily Moab City, and a district that was primarily rural Grand County. I think in our community, and this is me, you know, if you'd asked me this the week before, 2 weeks ago, I would have been all at large. But the idea that there is a disconnect between rural community and the town, or Moab City, I think it's a viable option and gives merit and credit to representation in those two districts. Other than that, when I really start to look at our demographic of our community, what segmentation is there for districting above and beyond that, I fail to find it. I fail to find a reason between any type of segmentation of the voter or any type of interests, special interests, or groups that are set above and beyond according like federal law or whatever we're looking at here. I fail to find that in our community. I think our biggest disconnect, besides maybe the political avenue, which I want to stay away from completely, is really a Moab City, the hustle, the bustle, the tourism, everything there, and the rural community where we have outlying farm and just folks who just are out there because they like to have their space. And there's a real difference of viewing the world in that sense. So if there is, that's something that I've thought about, and I'm still, I really think there's potential there, and I think it has merit. Bob?
I agree with you, Jeremy, 100%. We don't see the objective criterion for drawing districts, mostly because we're lay people. We've never done this before. But we do have professional planners, and we do have access to a professional district drawer who might be able to come up with objective criterion for drawing districts. I don't know if they can. They may come back and say, hey, your community is too mixed up. There are mansions next to shacks. There are 5-acre lots next to quarter-acre lots. There's no way you can do it. I'd be happy to hear that one way or the other, but I think you put your finger on it when you said, I can't see. And that's exactly my point. We can't see. And I think we owe it to Grand County to take a better look and to employ what expertise we have available to at least give us some more advice on what objective measures. Now, I want to also address the issue in balancing, let's say if we went 2 districts with so-called urban and rural, we still would have to make some decisions because they don't come out exactly that way. We're still going to have to move a census block here, move a census block there. We'll do that out of our own imagination about what neighborhoods should go together. But I think we should have some more data there. My own thinking about it is maybe there are 3 districts here. Maybe there's Old Moab, the city center. Maybe there are what I call the suburbs, which is Walker, Mountain View, so on. And maybe then there's the more rural part of the county. I don't know. I mean, when I walked my district in 2 elections, I was shocked to find how diverse it was in terms of who lived there. And maybe if we get Ms. Shepherd and Mr. Levine and Mr. Cooper together, they will come back and say, boy, there's no way you can justify drawing districts here, or more than 2. I don't know what they'll say, but I think we ought to hear it.
Marcy?
Microphone, please.
I have been thinking about this since the beginning of this committee. And the question I keep asking myself is, what does districts versus at-large versus a combination of both, what system is going to yield the most, the best candidates, people willing to run for office? Because I do feel like it is you're serving your community. And at one point I thought, okay, it has to be all at large, because at large is going to encourage the people who want to run for office and who want to serve Grand County. And if they all come from the same neighborhood, I'm okay with that if they're the people that are the most committed to serving. And I have changed my mind about that. I do think there is merit to districts, and not necessarily. I think the reality is the bulk of the population is in Moab City proper, and then the outlying areas take up more. And yes, we're going to have to ask some neighborhoods to be part of the rural district, at least until we get the 2020 census data. I think that may change things. They may become, different. I think what people are opposed to is splitting neighborhoods. Half the district is here and half is here and half is here in order to make this number correct, because then they can't even visit with their neighbors about their district. So I'm definitely pro districts and at large, and at this moment I'm kind of pro 3 at large and 2 districts.
Bob?
Just FYI, if the advice we've gotten so far is correct, we will have the 2020 census data before people run under this new form of government.
Yeah.
So whatever we do is hopefully will be tweaked around a bit to keep the numbers straight, if we recommend any districts. But you should be aware of that. There will be a change in any districts we recommend because of the timing of the census and the timing of the election of officials under a new form of government.
Judy?
My recommendation is we keep it simple. We go all at large. The best people run, but I'm not opposed to 3 at large and 2 districts. And I'm not opposed to Mr. Cooper doing that if down the road, if that's what we decide, he comes in and does it. I don't see any reason to bring in other people to give the visual of gerrymandering. Because if Mr. Cooper, who's completely unbiased on this, takes a look at the data and comes up with 2 districts, I'm fine with it. But and I don't know the lady at the planner, but I do know that there are a certain amount of people who would call into question if we use the planners, because that's just the way we work in Grand County. And they do look suspicious, both of them. She looks like a very nice lady, and he looks like a cute kid. So, so I'm really, as long as we can keep it from looking like we're dinking with the numbers, you know, I'm going to go either way. But I want people to vote for as many people who are spending their money as we can give them.
Cricket, then Walt.
I well know how I feel. I want to be able to vote for everyone, but I also can see it makes sense to me to have just the 2 districts, the city and the county, the rural. I can live with that, because then I get a vote for 4 out of 5. I can live with that. I feel like that that's going to spread the pool out more, where there'll be a lot more people that can run. I think I absolutely am 100% all at large, but I can live with 2.
Walt?
Could have gone with either at large or the combination. The most representative probably is all districts, but you only get to vote for 1 person. So anybody that was at the open houses that we're talking about this, that started out with the districts, immediately, for the most part, changed their mind. No, I don't want to vote for just 1 person. And whether it's a combination of 3 districts and 2 at large, or 2 districts and 3 at large, you're going to vote for either 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5, which people felt very strongly that they wanted to be able to at least vote for the majority. And as Jeremy has said on a number of occasions, when we had 7, and it was true for all of us, we got to vote for 3 out of 7, and that's not okay. I think as we look at this, that's probably not okay. I had not even considered this rural versus city thing. My great concern with the all at large is there is no certainty that they don't all come from the same geographic proximity, and I think that's an issue. I think most of the things we deal with in the county are consistent across the board, but some things are not, like zoning and some other issues that come up. And I hadn't really thought about the rural versus the urban, although I lived in Spanish Valley for 8 years when I was here before. And I didn't change much when I moved from out there into here and vice versa. So I think you got mix of people in both those locations, but there are some issues in the rural part of that are not the same as the urban. This absolutely gets us at least 1 person from outside the city limits if you went with the 2 districts, with 1 being a rural. So I think this is a healthy discussion. I don't know where we're going to go with it from now, but a combination was the preferred preferred issue for the people that we talked to and filled out the survey, not by a huge amount, but they preferred the combination over the at large. Anyway, that's all.
Judy, then Bob.
I had the clerk's office give me a rundown of from the beginning of the council form of government, and with the exception of the term that I served, there was only 1 person who was really outside of Moab City.
Oh, wow.
In all of the administrations. When I served, there was Rex Tanner and me and Al McLeod, and we were all in the valley. But that's really from 1993 forward. Everybody has been from the city already, so I'm not really afraid of people. I live in the valley, been there a long time. I'm not afraid of the city not representing me properly. They have for many, many years. So, and there's certainly no reason why you can't, I ran at large, you know, and I was in the valley at the time and had no problem once. Then they got to know me. So I mean, this is the reality. So I think that could be I think this could be another scream out for my all at large.
Bob?
I'd really like to hear, well, several things. One is, I think you did have some heartburn when everyone was in the city on the council in terms of planning and zoning issues. Yep. And I think that's exactly the kind of sensitivity that we want to encourage, that people who understand, you know, what the issues are for people who own 5 acres, 10 acres, 40 acres, as opposed to a city lot. But I'm really curious as to the thinking behind what makes urban versus rural feel like an okay way to divide the districts as opposed to any other way that we could specify that was objective and was not political, i.e. designed to favor a particular group. So if someone could help me with that, I think it would be you, Walt. I'd really like to hear that.
I don't, I would base it on what Cooper was showing us the other day. He can draw it however we want. I hadn't, when he was talking, thought about it being urban versus rural. I think there's an advantage. Again, the downside to me of all at large is you can all be from the same geographic area in the county. And I think making sure, and I didn't know this information Judy just shared with us, that there's been very few from the county, from the outside. I think if I was from Thompson or Castle Valley or someplace like that, I think maybe they would feel better that there's at least someone that lives outside the city limits of Moab. I don't have a real definitive rationale. I hadn't thought of the urban versus rural. I do like the idea of getting somebody out of the city limits of Moab that because probably they're all going to be from Moab otherwise. And that's, I don't have any better notion than that, Bob. I really don't.
Marcy, responding to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think you could conceivably divide the county north and south and have equal population.
East-west?
In east and west. I think 3 districts might be more challenging. You know, we talked about pie shape, but the reality then is that you've got parts of Moab City and parts of, for lack of a better expression, rural Grand County in the same district. And there's no guarantee that either place, the city or the county, is going to be represented by their elected official. Whereas I think if you try to group the rural residents kind of in a district, if you can, I think that makes a pretty clear platform for the person who's running in that district. You know, I happen to live in Spanish Valley, but maybe I feel like I have some issues in common with people in Thompson. You know, and it would be part of my duty to figure out what it is those residents are interested in an elected official. Whereas if the district is the city and the county, it's way too easy to concentrate on the residents in the city because it's easier to get to them. They're located in a smaller location, campaigning, all that kind of stuff, and that's where your population density is. And so then you are really courting, I think, the city voters as opposed to the rural voters.
Cricket?
Well, I would say that Bob's own argument about whether or not it matters about planning and zoning is if you're in the city, you have a whole different planning, and in the county's a whole different, how big and how often and how many. And so there's the perfect argument for a city district and a county district, because that is really the ones that affect your individual life is planning and zoning. And the city has their own department and the county has their own department. And I'm on the planning, full disclosure, I'm on the county planning commission. And so I live in town. I live in town and I'm on the county. So, you know what I mean? And I still care about what's going on out there. And some people don't think so, but I understand because I have a big apartment building in my backyard. So I understand. But anyway, so your own argument about what affects you most is planning and zoning, which is the perfect argument for why 2 districts, city and county. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to make a motion.
Mr. J?
I'd like to make a motion that we go to a 3 at large, 2 districts, with those districts being primarily a town or urban district and a rural district.
That's a town.
Town. I know town. It's not what I mean.
It's not
yeah,
urban.
it's not urban, but a town, a city area district, and a rural, primarily rural district, and that's my motion with the caveat that Mr. Cooper, by population, without limiting all gerrymandering.
So we have a motion
Can you
for,
finish that sentence?
we have a motion for 3
it.
at large and have 2 districts, with the 2 districts being 1 primarily within the town or the city of Moab limits, and 2nd, a rural district or outside the city, with the caveat that Mr. Cooper use only population data. Did I restate the motion
Yes,
correctly?
correct.
Do we have a second on that? Second, Ms. Green. Discussion on this item. Cricket Green. Bob?
Just a question. So does your motion imply that we contract with Mr. Cooper to draw that plan for
Yeah,
us?
I would say yes. I think Mr. Cooper's presentation was above and beyond. I think, didn't we already make a motion that if and when we do districts, didn't we do that already last? But so, well, let's
I thought we did.
let's sure that up and add that to it. That also amend that to add Mr. Cooper also drawing our districts, our 2 districts.
So we have an amended motion. Do we have a second on the amended motion? Second by Cricket Green. So now the motion reads that we would have 3 members, or out of the 5 members, 3 would be at large, 2 districts, primarily being the town or city of Moab area, and a rural district being outside those limits. With Mr. Cooper to use only population data, and for Mr. Cooper to be contracted to draw those districts.
You know,
Discussion.
this for me is consensus. I'm not gonna lie. It is consensus for me. This is my way of looking at the greater compromise, because I also am looking at the future of our community. You know, we don't know what's going to happen with growth, but we can kind of see it, you know, down the horizon, that growth in this community has happened, it will continue to happen, and we understand that more than likely the city boundaries will continue too. But I think at the heart of that is the idea that there is a rural community out there and there is a city community out there. And when I look at any other form of districting, I have a hard time to say, you know, like, do we district this area? Do we district Navajo Heights for wealth? Do we do that? Do we do this? You know, and I have a hard time thinking of any of those. Are we diverse community in our ideologies? Yes, but as far as the numbers go in population and diversity of ethnicity or other things, we're pretty limited that way. So where Moab and Grand County shines is our ideological differences, and those are broad. And to, you know, and as much as it would be somewhat interesting to listen to Zachariah and Judy, but at the same time, they're hired employees of one of a municipality of the Moab City and the other of the county, and and that's great, but I think to keep it above board and above water, it is important for us to look at this as a defining what really is the need for districts, defining why we're doing these districts, and also, being able to have your vote heard and being able to do that is my reasoning behind this. So with my consensus, it would be because I was fairly staunch all at large, but the more I look at it, the more I say, what preservation would I like to see in my community as a sixth generation Moabite and Grand County resident? I want to see that rural heart preserved. I want to see that, and I want to see our city culture preserved. And those are the things that I look at, and for me, that's distinct to different districts in that mindset. Whereas the rest at large, that gives you the ability to vote for 4 out of 5. Nobody can complain that their vote doesn't count, their vote doesn't matter. And it also gives us a representative who's going to be more minded of the rural area and a representative who's going to be more minded of what the city needs are.
Real quick, Mr. Anderson, a question for you, sir. Have you seen this makeup where there are more at-large seats than district seats in the state of Utah?
Some counties are all at large.
I have to double check, but I don't think there are.
Summit is all at large.
We have 3 at large and 6 districts. I could do a little snooping and find that answer out next week, but my guess is that having more by district is pretty well the standard. That said, I don't think I do know there's no requirement that it be one way or the other.
Thank you. I think Walt and Bob. Walt?
Keeping with our uniqueness.
Gavin answered one of the questions I had, which was, is there any reason that we shouldn't move in this direction? And the other would be a question to Bob before we take a vote. I'd like to understand clearly what your issues and concerns are on this, and if we don't go with this planning, and one of my observations, having lived around in different places here, is there are some geographical areas you can refer to as one place or another, but they're not homogeneous in politics or economic status or anything else in this town. In fact, I've had too many people come here and say, y'all don't have any zoning here, do you? and I don't mean to say that in a negative way. We are not very distinctive, one personality neighborhoods even. There may be some little places there are, but to try to carve those out in some kind of districting, I think would be a mistake here. But I do really want to hear you, make sure we're listening to everything everybody is saying here, and if you would.
Sure. There are a couple of things that go into my thinking. First of all, in spite of the fact that I'm probably the most liberal person on this panel, I'm also the most conservative, because I support sticking with what the voters have endorsed 3 separate times, which is more people elected by district than at large. So maybe I need to switch parties. I don't know, Jeremy.
I'd love to have you.
So that's certainly one issue. Another issue that troubles me is maintaining diversity on the governing body. And I think districts are a really important tool for doing that. Without suggesting that I think our city council people aren't wonderful, there's way less diversity there than there is on the county council. maybe that's by virtue of the fact that they're all from the city. I don't think the issue of representation is the key issue. I think the issue is of sensitivity.
What does that mean, Bob?
That means appreciation for the issues of a particular area or area. For instance, I think Spanish Valley has, especially southern Spanish Valley right now, has some unique issues that some people just aren't sensitive to. It doesn't make sense to them. I live on a dead-end street, so traffic noise doesn't bother me.
For the moment, you don't want to do it.
Well, that wall I built was about traffic noise.
Except people coming by late at night in a
Side by side.
side by side.
Yeah. No, we know we know your sound is comforting to know
That's right.
that you're
Okay,
working.
suck up is over. Let's go on.
Mr. Chair, make a comment?
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
I have found some information on what other counties have done. I go through this really quickly, but to answer the question, no, there's no county which has more at large than by district. Cache County has 7-member county council, all at large. Grand County and Morgan County are the same, 5 by district, 2 at large. Salt Lake County has 7 council members, 6 by district, 3 at large. Wasatch County has 7 council members, 5 by district, 2 at large. Summit County has 5 at large for council. Tooele County is gonna vote, this fall, or no, they just did vote, they were ready for it to go into effect. They have a 5-member council, all by district. And, Morgan County, has proposed a plan that would create a 5-member county commission, all at large.
If I can finish.
You know, Utah County is a mess, and I couldn't.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, returning to Bob's comment, then I think, or did you have a question from Mr. Anderson? Okay, it's Bob.
The other part of my thinking is I've run lots of campaigns here in Grand County and been intimately involved with even more. And if I were to advise an at-large candidate, I would say, forget the outlying areas. Concentrate on the high-density neighborhoods for your campaign. And again, I think that's somewhat problematical, even though it's good advice. It doesn't lead you down a path that I really love. I wonder what the reason is that no one else has gone the direction we're thinking of. And I know we're mavericks, I know we're free thinkers here, but I wonder why. So I'm going to vote against the motion. I want to be clear about that. It's not a ditch I'm going to die in. I'm not going to threaten to quit or walk out the room or not wave to you as you go by. Or remember that Jeremy was a co-debater with my daughter. But I think we're being hasty here, unnecessarily. And I think we ought to continue to inform ourselves. If we're worried about using people who are hired by the 2 government entities, we could use the chairs of the 2 planning commissions, or have each planning commission nominate a member to work with Mr. Cooper. I just want to see what's out there. Maybe at the end of that research, I would say, hey, 2's the best we can do, or all at large is the best we can do. I don't know.
Okay, we have Marcy, then Judy, then Jeremy, then Cricket. So everybody wants to talk. So Marcy goes first.
Well, I just think the data that Mr. Cooper presented last week was fairly clear that the bulk of the population is within Moab City.
But I said it was half and half, pretty much.
Right, and so I just want to reiterate that no matter how we divide the districts, if we have 5 districts, they're all going to include a portion of the city. And then as a recommendation to someone who's running in that district, well, concentrate on the city because that's where the bulk of the population is. Only now you have 5 people doing that. So I feel very strongly about that. And then the last thing that I want to say is, you know, I think that this committee itself is a fine example of a working committee that's really dedicated to its mission and to listening to one another and building consensus. And, you know, consensus, compromise is give and take on both sides of the equation. And I want to reiterate that.
Judy, then Jeremy, then Cricket.
Oh, next.
Yes.
One of the reasons that you have the city as it is because it's nonpartisan, and it isn't people running against each other. They're the highest vote getters get the job, and so that's how you kind of end up with a kind of a homogenized looking group on that, and we've seen that over the last 30 years ourselves many times. So I don't believe it's because they're in the city. I think it's because of it being nonpartisan, and I think it's because of it being the 3 highest vote getters instead of Jeremy having to run against Robert, and you doing that, you have a different kind of a dynamic. I think that's the reason. And I think it's fine for the city. It doesn't work for the county. As for what people have said the last 3 or 4 elections, that they wanted it to stay the same, nothing stays the same. Life goes on. My teeth are falling out. I mean, this is life. So I don't believe we should necessarily worry about keeping it like the last 16 elections. We're kind of unique.
We do have another, whatever we do here, we will have to decide whether it's going to be a top 3 vote getters election or a seat A, seat B, seat C. That's another decision out there.
Jeremy and then Cricket.
Yeah, I would, my question, my comment or question would be for Mr. Anderson. Would, you know, in comparison to rural communities that are, if you're saying apples to apples, what are the majority of counties that are of the same type of as us?
Class 4 or 5?
Class 4 or 5, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's a fair question, and there are really a ton of different dynamics in a big urban county like Salt Lake County, as you can imagine. I'm not sure how the splits work, you know, how the districts are drawn in the more rural counties, which would be Summit and Wasatch. As I mentioned, Cache is a little bit bigger, but that's all district. I mean, all at large. A couple of things that I've seen in Salt Lake County, and again, the comparison's probably not really apt, is even though the district representatives may represent a particular city or several cities, I think my experience over the years is they almost never carry the city's flag when it comes to county business. There's a lot of ways in which county business is quite different from city business. Someone was mentioning the fact, you know, planning and zoning is always the big issue. That you've got separate planning and zoning in both the city and the unincorporated county. The other thing we've seen in Salt Lake County, and again, even though it's a big urban county, is years ago we had a kind of a government entity called a planning township. These planning townships were unincorporated areas around Salt Lake Valley, and some of them were very, very small, very rural, even up here. And it was a devil of a time to find people who were interested in running for those positions. We had to go oftentimes, many times, without having any representative at all from certain areas.
Cricket?
I don't know. Again, the dynamic is so different in Grand County. I don't know if that's very helpful.
Thank you. I think that's my point too in this, in calling for this vote and this, and reiterate consensus is that we are unique. I'm not particularly worried about what Summit does. I'm not particularly worried about that. I probably worry more about my neighbors to the south in San Juan, my neighbors in Emory, and those areas. But I really think that this is, in a sense, a way for us to have consensus, to also keep our integrity of what we have within our community. And yeah, that's my stance on it. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Cricket?
I would just probably say, I think we're sitting there trying to say that, what does everybody else do when we say we're different? So why are we asking what everybody else does when we're different anyway? But my biggest
You have to
thing,
know what to be different from.
my biggest thing, seriously, is fair representation. And there's no better fair representation than being able to vote for everyone that's representing you. To me, that is the most representation I can get, is who I get to vote for. And I really hadn't thought through what Judy said about the fact that you're not having to pick a partisan person. So that could really change the dynamic of who runs. I mean, as far as like all of, if you can only have one of these each, then it's not going to be a hodgepodge of just everybody. And I hadn't quite thought of that before. So, but again, I think me willing to go for 2 districts is huge, because I wanted to have a vote on everyone before.
Bob?
Can I call the question? I think we've
We've
talked this
We've talked at the
out.
top.
Yeah.
Sure. I wanted to jump in and give my 2 cents,
Thank you.
if possible. Here are my thoughts. I think Grand County is very unique. There's not very many counties like Moab where you have really one city. I mean, we have Thompson, we have Castle Valley, we have Spanish Valley or South Moab, or whatever we're eventually going to call it. But we have a very unique set of politics that come from both the city and the county. And that's unique. And I like the fact that Castle Valley, we can give them the closest thing that they want to their own district, because otherwise, if you put Castle Valley with a big chunk of the city, I think they'd be furious. This gives them an opportunity. We cannot guarantee by any sense of the imagination that we could have everybody from the county or even split. The numbers, we just don't have it. If it was closer on the numbers, maybe we could do it, but we would have to go 4 or 5 districts, and then how we draw them gets squishy at best or murky and muddy. My thoughts are, looking at this without involving other opinions, using our own intellect, our own backgrounds, we're all unique people. I don't think there is one thing that all of us would agree on, which is healthy. So I think this is a good idea. I like that we see that people aren't exactly happy with the outcome, but they're willing to accept it. And that is usually a victory in most sense of the imagination of a compromise. So those are my two cents. Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion on the table. If there's no further discussion, a motion by Mr. Day, and it's been seconded. 3 at large with 2 districts, primarily in the town, and or with 1 district in the town/city of Moab, and another district, a rural district, outside those city limits. Primarily outside those city limits. With Mr. Cooper to only use population data, and for us to hire Mr. Cooper to draw the 2 districts. That's the vote before us. We'd ask you to raise your right hand. All in favor? All against? It's 6-1 with Mr. Greenberg in opposition. The motion passes.
May I say, I can live with this.
I'm sorry.
So I can live with this. We'll call it consensus.
So
I don't
see,
want to be responsible
I can
for
live
you
with
not
it.
living.
All right.
I don't want that weight.
Any other discussion on item H? Otherwise, I'm assuming we're going to set it for the agenda for, I guess we need to get the information to Mr. Cooper to draw the
You
districts.
want me to continue to?
I would feel comfortable with Bob handling that.
Absolutely.
Perhaps we could put it on, I don't know if 1 week's enough time. He seemed to
Seems
drive
like
it really
30
fast.
seconds is
Yeah.
enough time.
He was amazing. I was just like, okay.
So-
why is there gerrymandering? I mean, nobody want to tell me that?
So can we put this on the agenda next week to maybe have him with a presentation?
I'll email him today.
Do we want to ask him to give us a couple examples? Because there's going to be some cutting into the city, either on the south end or the north end, based on the information that he provided us. So maybe we'll set that on the agenda. If he could appear over the phone teleprompter, however he wants to do it, to kind of show us the information, or if he could send us PDFs beforehand.
That would be
Well-
better.
Mr. Chair, can I be clear, did the motion pass?
It did, Your Honor. Yes, you did. Sorry, it's Your Honor. Gut instinct. Attorney to attorney, you scared me.
You just got to be a judge.
Okay.
He missed that, but Judy says you just got to be the judge for a minute there.
All right. Any other discussion on setting this up? So it'll be on the agenda for next week. If for whatever reason he can't have it produced by then we'll go back. Yes, Walt?
If we understand the timeline here, we probably are, before this ever takes effect, going to have census data for 2020.
So it'll have to be tweaked again?
He would be able to, what he's given us is conceptual.
Well, he said he could add in the information. He said he could get it within. Mr. Anderson, the presenter, his name is William Cooper. He said that his goal was to shoot within 5% deviation between the two different districts. Is that the goal, or would you recommend being even closer to the 5%?
It would be nice to get closer. What the court would ask if it came to litigation was, would it have been possible for Grand County to get the population numbers closer? And if the answer is yes, then the court's going to reject it. If the answer is no, then the court's going to uphold it. So it's really an issue of, well, one of the issues too is where you're getting your population data. Right. So
Census.
that's a challenge. The other thing I might recommend, we went through this in Salt Lake County a couple of years ago. We created these metro townships, which is a new form of municipal government. We had to go through a district creation process. And I don't know what tools Mr. Cooper uses. Our county surveyor had a program that would, you draw out a reasonable facsimile of what you think the boundaries would be, put it in the computer, and then the computer could adjust even moving one household
Yeah.
from one district to another.
Mr. Cooper said he could do that.
Population totals would do.
He has that.
That's just based on an average number of residents per household. I don't know what the program was called, I don't know what Mr. Cooper's using. But again, the question is gonna be, could we have done a better job?
Okay,
We'll ask him to get as close as possible.
Yes.
perfect. Any other discussion on item H? Everybody doing okay? Do we want to move on to item I? All right, we have to. It's a joke, haha. Moving to item I, discussion and possible action on recommending one of the four forms of county government postponed from July 19th, 2019. Ms. Till led the discussion last time. We'll move it over to her.
Well, I don't need to lead the discussion, that's for certain. I think that Mr. Anderson, really made the point in his, one part of his outline is, what is the difference between a commission and a council, and that the primary difference is where does the executive power really lie? And we saw the confusion that citizens have about our current form of government because, something happens out at, I can't even give you an example, but people get on the phone, they call their county council person, and they say, oh, my neighbor's burning trash. And then, I'm using this as an absurd example, but then, at the next county council meeting, trash burning is on the agenda because our county council people have been acting as commissioners for all these years. So, in a sense. And so, when we move to, if we recommend a council, we are departing from that concept. The response from the county council person is going to, be different perhaps. And so I think this is a big issue to contemplate, this committee.
Jeremy?
There was some new light from previous last week, thanks to Mr. Anderson, with the ability for us to, write in and make it part of the governing documents that a part-time 5-member commission hire a manager is now possible. I think that for me changes some of the hurdles that I had, and makes it sense. I think also another thing that has been brought up to my attention about commissions is how they are received versus council members by the state. So I asked, and
who'd you ask?
I asked some of our state reps, and it is typically, you will find that commissioners are shown a bit of a more, lack of a better word, respect. And this is because they have to be more involved in the workings of the county government. It does not make them, and I would also reiterate this flip side too, it does not make them as lame duck or not a hard worker, but I mean there's no guarantee they will be too, but as a whole, when you ask that question with the state and keeping in mind what the purpose of the county government is to do, is to run the business here locally on the behest of what the state deems necessary and to make that function. For us, for many, many years, we've always been viewed, I mean, imagine how different it would have been if we were viewed as a 5-member or a 7-member extended commission versus a council. I think that semantic alone would have carried a little more weight at our state. So it's not just a matter of representation just locally, but what those representatives and carry with them at the state level for lobbying for needs within our county. And I think, in that sense, commissioners carry a little bit more weight. That could change in the future, but at the same time, our state legislatures right now, they find it easier to communicate with the commissioner because they understand more so what is going on in their community.
Walt?
Gavin, this is Walt. You just heard what Jeremy said related, and maybe you don't know this, related to the perception of a council member versus a county commissioner in Utah. Have you, in all your 30-something years, is that something that you've observed as well?
I'd have to say yes, probably. Bearing in mind that so much of that kind of thing depends on individual personalities. We have, for instance, a council member in the Salt Lake County Council who commands a lot of weight up at the legislature, just by virtue of his knowledge, his experience, his demeanor. One of the things I noticed in separation of powers forms of government, and this would be both participating in activities like UAC or the legislature, is that council members tend not to be as involved as commissioners. And when a commissioner is involved, their opinion tends to take on more weight, and I'm thinking primarily of UAC meetings. When Salt Lake County changed its form of government in 2001, there was a dramatic shift in the leadership of UAC, and UAC's got different sections based on the different elected officials. And the main section is the section that deals with county commissioners, county council members. And all of a sudden, it was Utah County that was controlling UAC, and Salt Lake County had become something of maybe a second-class citizen. Again, I have to reemphasize that depends so much on individual personalities and who gets elected and how they deal with that kind of situation. that have county council forms of government, council executive, that they tend to be less involved, less interested, and maybe, as was said, carry a little bit less weight.
Walt has a follow-up for you.
I have to put a lot of caveats on that. That's my own observation, which is limited, and it is, again, so much based on individuals and personalities.
Walt, your follow-up?
Yeah, Gavin, one of the things that I think you got a number of our attention with this morning or earlier in this meeting, it was my understanding if you went with a council, it would be either an appointed or an elected administrator, whatever, manager.
Executive.
I keep getting that wrong.
We're going to give you a flashcard.
Executive, but it changes with whoever we seem to be talking to, but executive.
That's one of the important things in the optional plan. You need to decide what to call this person. If you choose that path, you just can't call them that person. You got to call them something.
The county commission form does not have one, does not have one of those people in the legal definition of a commission in the state of Utah. And I thought in talking to you before, the fact that we decide that this county commission, if we were to go that way, needed to do that is not compelling to them to have to do it. And I personally need that clarified because to me, dividing 13 organizations up in the county government here amongst 5 county commissioners to try to make it all coalesce and come together is something that for me is a hurdle to get past, just from having managed some big operations. If I'd had those operations split up amongst 5 people that had to come together and make it all work, that would drive me crazy. And so if it is absolutely a given that the county commission, if we went that way, has to have a professional appointed administrator. I'm talking about with some criteria for experience and knowledge and all those kind of things. That's one thing. If it's just they can if they want to, that's a whole different ball game here in this complex county that's going to have more and more challenges that are going to need a coordinated team to work on, as opposed to 5 people with different capabilities and different political ideas and different all kinds of things trying to make it come together. So is it a for sure that we can write it in there and that's binding legally?
Well, maybe I need to just put a couple of caveats on there. It would be somewhat unusual. I think if it were something that were in the plan and the voters voted on it, it would certainly survive any kind of a legal challenge. The problem is, and I think we kind of hinted with this, with the conversation with Bob a few minutes ago, is it does really tend to move away from a county commission form of government, and it becomes a kind of a hybrid.
Right.
So I'm going to say, in response to your question, Walt, whether it's this way or that way, it is definitely not required. It is probably possible, maybe even go further and say it's likely to be possible, and it's really becomes a question then of whether it's a good idea. Let me respond to another aspect of your question, and that was how do you divide up portfolios between 5 county commissioners. That's a potentially hard one. It's going to get into a potential problems again, so dependent on individual personalities. In Salt Lake County, when we had a commission form of government, we had 3 very distinct departments: Public Works, Administrative Services, and Community Services. Community Services was, again, Parks and Rec and the Grand Center and the entertainment kinds of facilities, libraries. And that worked really quite well for 20 20 years, and nobody tried to manipulate that very much one way or the other. And so, even with strong personalities, even with power changing from Republicans and Democrats and back, that really worked fairly well in Salt Lake County. Now, you compare that with, some of you have been around Utah long enough, might remember the old Salt Lake City Commission form of government, and there was a terrible, terrible fight in that form of government. It was way back in the late 70s and early 80s when Jake Garn was mayor, Glenn Greener was one of the county commissioners, and they were constantly bickering over which divisions the city commissioners would supervise. That again is really primarily a problem with personality. So it is, I think Walt is just suggesting, that a system that required the county to divvy up those divisions into different portfolios probably creates a more likely scenario of that creating problems. That's just a guess though. And again, it's based on my limited experience.
Walt's got another follow-up for you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Then we've got Bob, then Judy.
My experience as an elected official, as a council person in Grand County, at the legislature, is that it's entirely a matter of personality. That's for one. For two, the legislature is a council. It has legislative authority. The executive authority rests with the governor. It's kind of hard to get your head around the fact that they might envy commissioners. Well, I guess not hard to get your head around that. They'd rather have all the power. We know that. Again, a commission form of government, it boggles the mind that we could require them to divest of some of their executive authority. And the message we got loud and clear from the people who currently operate our county is, please put a professional manager between us and the politicians.
Judy, then Walt.
Bob and I interviewed an awful lot of county employees and an awful lot of ex-county employees. And the people who are running the county, who are actually doing the day-to-day stuff, need to have a person to go to with, I need this and I need this now. One of the challenges that Ruth has had is that she didn't have enough authority to make so many of the decisions she needed to make. So what she was constantly having to do is put it on an agenda. And the people who are on the council now are constantly complaining about the fact that they're having to work too hard. We're going to cut it down to 5 people and get and we have a really qualified manager running the county that can be fired if they don't do their job by the council. Just looks to me like a more workable, in my working lifetime, the fewer people I had to consult, the better. So I'm leaning towards council, just simply because I think that I don't want to reinvent the wheel, and I think that's what a 5-man commission would be. And we're asking these people to be part-time, so the fact that they have a little less responsibility probably would bring us more people into the mix.
Walt?
Along with what Judy said, if we did write it in there that they have to appoint this person, they still don't have to delegate their executive authority to that person. And you got 5 people that are going to be second guessing that executive every day they want to. And that's not workable. I told you I worked for a 9-person commission, but my boss worked directly for the chairman of that commission. They didn't muck in the day-to-day stuff. If we do a hybridized version of this, we're setting it up to where any commissioner can still muck with that executive just like they can with Ruth right now. And I don't think you can combine the two of them. The legislature got rid of it on purpose, and are making us make a decision one way or another. And so I'm seeing where Judy's going, and it's sounding a lot cleaner and less likely to. If we couldn't fire a person that wasn't doing well, that's untenable to me. And it was absolutely untenable to the people we talked to in this process who said, we don't want somebody that can, from day one, be in conflict with the 5 elected members of the, in this case, a council, and can veto stuff because you're just setting them up to fight all the time unless the personalities are exactly right. And so that's all I had on that.
Marcy?
So I was the one that was trying to push the calendar kind of along and see if we could move things more quickly in terms of making this actual change should the voters approve it. And I was told point blank twice now that that's not a possibility, and I'm accepting that. And I feel the same way about this idea that, maybe we could conceivably set up a commission and suggest or require that they hire a county manager when in fact that's not the way the law was intended to be interpreted or read, in my opinion. And the law is pretty clear that a commission grants the legislative and the executive power to the commissioners, and the council separates the legislative and the executive power. And that seems pretty straightforward to me. And the idea that we would try to create something that's a little different or a little new, I'm opposed to.
I'll jump in. So my thought is I think Mr. Anderson has said this many, many times before, that there's no perfect form of government. The interesting thing is the problems always arise around personalities. So in my mind, how do you address the problem with personalities? And
make that a disqualification for office.
Right. So I struggle with the idea that between the two, but I look at them, and I don't think there's as great of disconnect with separations of powers. I know on paper it's going to say they are the executive branch and they're the legislative branch. But I'm not kidding myself when you look and you understand that the council is selecting this individual, that we're neighbors, and that there's a lot more problems that we have on a day-to-day function than I think one person can handle. I mean, as an attorney, I've had to contact, the city manager, and sometimes if there's a bunch of fires, you get put on the list, and eventually he'll get to you. Same thing with a brush fire. If you have a commissioner, you can call them up, they can act more quickly. It is not the ideal, perfect scenario. But in my mind, I like the idea that you have 3 at-large people you could call up and complain about a problem, and maybe one other person that you could call up and try to assess the situation. I like that. I like that there are options. It's not a perfect solution by any means. I think there are flaws with both. But if we're looking at the underlying problem of selecting somebody with a personality, a commissioner, they have to run. They have to be somebody that's elected. They have to work with other people. I understand it's difficult, but it's currently what we're doing now. We are having the individuals that are on the council now doing this exact function. The difference is Ruth. So then it asks the question, if it's not possible, I think Mr. Anderson and Mr. Anderson can correct me, he's saying it's theoretically possible, but we're probably opening ourselves up to challenges. I accept that. For the time being, I like the idea of a commission. I'm not sold on any of them. I'm not 100% happy about a council or not 100% happy about a commission, but I would probably favor it at this time because of that ability to contact somebody directly. Because if I contact that commissioner, he can do something. Whereas if I contact my council person and it's realms into the executive powers, then they have to put it on the agenda and go from there, or they have to do it in an open public meeting, which slows everything down. Just my thoughts. But we've got Bob and then Cricket.
If I were going to run again, and I thought I was going to win, I'd vote for a commission. However, I'm not, and I think what's best for the county, and again, I'm going to take the conservative position, is to keep a council.
But we haven't had a council.
We're called a council. I think that will make what major changes we've already decided on much more palatable to people. I also, my experience is different than yours, Steve. When I've got a problem in the city, I go to the city manager. That's one person, because they have the executive authority. They can fix it. If it's a matter of, if the manager says, well, chief policy doesn't allow me to fix it for you, Bob, then I go to the council members. I agree. There's no perfect form of government unless y'all put me in charge of everything.
And that would only be perfect in your eyes.
That's right. Yes, true. One man's perfect is another woman's terrible.
Judy?
We haven't heard what he's going to say.
Well,
The fact, whether it's a council or a county commissioner, doesn't prevent you from going to whomever was voted. It doesn't prevent you from going to them and saying, I have a problem. Is there anything you can do? And that councilman can say, I can talk to the executive. He can talk to the executive.
Directly?
He can talk directly to the executive and say, and see if it can be something that is, or they can say to you, you need to go talk to the manager, because the manager has the immediate path to rectifying that.
we can go talk to the road supervisor
Not
if it's a road problem.
Interfere, but I think
You're not, they're not going
Right.
to interfere.
But he couldn't guide
Direct.
that person to do it.
Direct.
Right. He couldn't direct it to him, but he could.
When we were on the council, we couldn't go. I couldn't go and say to Dave Warner, who was the road man, you need to plow my street, buddy. I'm on Kirby Lane.
But you could bring it up.
It wouldn't have been ethical then, and it isn't ethical now.
Although it used to be the motto here, the only people who ran for county council were people whose roads were not paved.
That's true.
Right. So we've got Cricket, then Walt.
So thank you for explaining how I was trying to figure out. You completely explained my commission, the reason that I think that a commission is better than a council, because of the fact that you have to slow everything down, you have to have open public meetings, and you have to do all these things. I would like to think that we are going to vote people in who are going to know that they need a roof. And we've already been handling our government, according to Gavin, like it was a commission anyway. So I just think if it's been working, why undo it?
Walt?
You were just describing exactly what I'm very worried about. Being able to go to anybody that can then wade in on this thing. That's just chaos. That's just absolutely not the way it goes. And you can't do that with a commission, because one of those commissioners is going to be overseeing, in theory, the area of interest you have at that moment. And so you're going to have to pick the right one of those people to go fix your road problem or your whatever problem you have to do, as opposed to going to a single professional administrator that supervises all those people. And I just, if 5 people are in charge, nobody's in charge.
But
it's just.
Are we ready for a motion, Mr. Chairman?
To a response to that, you're saying one person's going to cover all 7 areas, right? Here's the problem with that. That person has to talk to all the division heads, whereas you could have a more intimate relationship with a commissioner that works with that other person on a daily basis, right? If he's the head, if he's in charge of that department, he should be working with them. He will report to them every couple weeks like they do now.
I had 11 people that worked for me in my last thing with 1,500 employees. And I picked those people. And if they weren't good, they didn't stay. And Jeremy does the same thing where he is. And if he couldn't make the day-to-day decisions, if he wasn't in charge of the day-to-day decisions, and you got 4 of his different branches that are trying to run that hotel on a given basis, without a single point of overall responsibility, it doesn't work.
Jeremy, then Bob.
See, it's what you're saying is the reason I'm in favor of a commission. It sounds crazy, but it's more intuitive. I look at it as, okay, right now I am solely in charge of an entire hotel, right? Well, I have department heads within that hotel that answer to me. And we have a manager or an administrator with the council, that's that one person in charge of that whole hotel. But it's in the sense that, that sounds like it'd be a little more convenient and you'd have more access. But the reality of it comes down to is what's on Ruth's table is a lot. The theory that I have when I think of a more intuitive commission, it gives credence to people who are elected that are going to have to work with our department heads, and they're going to have to work with the experts. And in no way, shape, or form do I think I know better than the road department head on how to mix asphalt and at what temperature it should be laid or anything like that. So the commissioners are relying upon that. But if I was a commissioner and you came to me and you said, hey, we have a real problem, I'll use an example. I have a real problem right now with Spanish Valley Drive. They came in, they put those water lines down. I had a section that they tore out on my water line that was paved, that I personally had paved right there, that is now just dirt, and it's only going to be a matter of a good rainstorm before I have a nice ditch, and it wasn't put back to where it was. Well, right now I go to my council person and she's not approachable right now, so I go to the department head and they're, we're working on this is supposed to be. Whereas in a sense with a true commission where they understand that this is under their purview, I know who I need to go to that's under that. I can help get pressure to move that ball along as an individual. And that's me. I'm looking for, if we're changing our form of government, I want something that's a little more responsive and intuitive. And that's what I'm looking for. That's the reason I look at it, and also the clout that we have and a little more strength. We should have a lot more say than what we have right now in our community at the state level, because everybody comes here from the state, everybody visits, everybody comes, and we don't have a lot of say from our county working with state legislator, save a few. And I think it would create a better dynamic that way. Also looking for a more intuitive form of government that reacts a little quicker to not necessarily like to my taxes, but more so necessarily to, do your job. This road is a mess. We need to fix this road, or we need better infrastructure, or whatever it is. Those are the types of things that I think we can be more intuitive on, and more. We don't drag our feet necessarily as much, and then I have access to that individual via whatever. That's one of my reasonings behind it. But I understand where you're coming from, and I'll reiterate again. The only perfect form of government is no government, but that's just the libertarian in me, I mean. So it is not going to be perfect no matter what we do, and there's going to be incidents where personalities are going to cause that. But a commissioner should have a personality that should work well with others. In theory, that's not always going to happen, but he's going to be required to be more responsible in representing the community. So that's why I lean towards commission.
I've got Bob, myself, Walt, Marcy.
Two things. You really can't require commissioners to do anything except get one more vote than the other guy.
There's truth.
And I'm not hearing anything new right now, and I am perceiving a 4-3 vote. And now I'm wishing I'd gone along with what Chrissy said, that we needed a majority of 5. So we're at a fork. I mean, I can make a motion right now, and it'll pass or it won't. Or we can sit on this for a week or 2 weeks and think about it some more and hope someone gets persuaded another way. But following with our earlier action, I'm going to make a motion that we recommend a council manager form of government to the voters.
I'll second it.
We've got a motion to make a council form of government.
Council manager,
Council manager form of government.
as opposed to a council elected mayor.
Seconded by Ms. Tillett. Discussion.
And I think it is substantially personality driven.
Yeah, we've still got the order. I think everybody's still talking about the same thing. Anything else, Bob?
Nope.
Here's my thought. Right now, we've got a wonderful person who is in charge of this. I think my vote would probably be Ruth, is the person that's currently managing all of the affairs, even though she's an administrator or manager, whatever you want to call her. She's in that position now. We do not have that individual. And looking at the hiring past of this county, it's really difficult to find that individual and then to convince them to come here. I mean, I can think of 7 different examples off the top of my head. We've got a chief of police, we've got a city manager 1, city manager 2. The list goes on about individuals that are not from this area to find a highly qualified individual that are going to come into Moab and that are going to manage all these different departments. That's a concern, because looking at historically how we've been hiring, you can't guarantee that that person exists. You can't guarantee that they'd mesh with everyone here. I struggle to think that the other places that have commissions, their roads don't function. I struggle to think that their governments don't work. My goal at the end of the day is to address personalities and to address what I think is possible. But anytime that anybody needs a professional hired, I know that the accounting firm here has been looking for an accountant for however long. It's a problem. And that's really concerning to me. Again, I think whatever form we pick, government's not going to burn down. We're not going to do anything. It's not going to go terrible. I think we'll elect wonderful people. I think with the number 5, we've got a better guarantee that we'll have more contested races, which should produce more qualified candidates. So that's kind of why, for me, a commission works. I think if Ruth would not have given information that she was retiring, I would not have voted for the commission for him. So, Walt.
Yeah, I just listening to Jeremy's talk a while ago, and if I understood you could be suggesting that you could take your job and get rid of you, and you take housekeeping, your building maintenance, and your front desk operation, and put 3 people in there and tell them you're going to run this hotel, and you 3 got to get along and divide this stuff up and make it all work, because that's what a commission is going to do if you do not have a single point of contact. That's why people don't set up business that way.
I think more sense what I mean is if I look at an ownership, and I've got one owner really right now, but there's a lot of hotels out there. Majority of the hotels actually have ownership groups, right? So the ownership group is like the commission. And then there are some hotels that do not have a general manager. They have an operation front desk. They have that. I would say those hotels do not run as fluently because they're more micromanaged in a lot of ways. By coming in and by hiring me, I'm that manager that places in that piece.
You're the contact.
Yeah, and I understand the thought there is, well, then we have a professional doing it. And that's great, as long as your professional is competent. And that's what it comes down to. And the reason, and I'm going to say solely the main reason I lean towards a commission, and is one main reason. and that is more accountability by the elected representative. Because if you're a commissioner, and you are, even if you're a part-time commissioner and you don't put the work in, you're not going to be reelected. And that weeds out those folks. They might get elected once, but they're not going to get elected twice. And that weeds them out, and it strengthens our local form of government. That's the main reasoning behind it. And if they, as a co-op of, in that analogy of owners, decide not to hire a manager, then they better be able to do the job. They'd be foolish not to hire a professional, in my personal opinion, as a management, in that way. But I also think that it creates a more intuitive buy-in, a more intuitive ownership, if you will have it, with our local form of government by our representatives, because they are then required to look at the books. And if we're going with that analogy, I have seen ownerships where there is one owner who doesn't even have majority, but he's the one involved, and the rest don't look at the books, and it doesn't end well.
Yeah.
So I want more of a buy-in from our elected representatives, and I feel like that's the main reason is a commission requires them to be more bought in to what they're doing.
Walt, response?
You know, the other thing, Stephen, I cannot imagine picking the form of government because we may or may not be able to find a given personality to come run it. I mean, there's more Ruths out there, and again, I look at what Judy and Bob derived from the people they interviewed, which to the person said, don't instill chaos on here. About the time these people are going to get to know what we do, they may get voted out or quit or whatever the thing is, and then a piece of your organization is run askew there. I think in Moab, if you pay a professional administrator what it's going to take to get a good person to come here, they'll come here. There's a lot of people who like to come to Moab.
Got Marcy, then Cricket, then Bob.
I don't really want my government to be run by my elected officials' intuition. I want them to be responsive to the citizens, and I want them to understand the laws that govern the county, and if those laws are not doing what they were intended to do, or if they think that those laws need to be amended or changed, I want them to have the power to create those laws. And so I do think that council people can be responsive to the citizens. Clearly they're responsive in the fact that they'll be voted in or out depending on the job that they perform. I also would remind people that the day-to-day operation of the county, that we're responsible for a smooth transition in terms of from one form of government to the next, and that it was very clear from staff and former council people and current council people that they favored a hired, appointed manager, and that was also in our open houses. That had significant support from the public as well. I think that the commission form of government creates, I can't say chaos, but I think there's 5 cooks in the kitchen. Everybody runs on their ticket and the kinds of changes or improvements that they would like to make. And there's not a lot of regard for the day-to-day function of the county when they're running for office. And I also feel like that if the executive duties are clearly defined, in our optional plan, yes, it will be a challenge to find somebody to do that job. But those people exist, and we just keep working at it till we do. So,
Cricket, then Bob.
So I'm confused that Marcy thinks that the manager can write laws?
no, I said our council people will be creating the laws that influence the direction of the county, and that the executive person is creating the procedures to implement those laws.
Which is exactly what the council could do, the commission could do. Okay. I just was confused by her question, so I'm done.
Bob.
I think there's a fantasy here that there are more foolish and incompetent county managers than there are foolish and incompetent elected officials. I think all of us sitting here can think pretty easily of some foolish and incompetent elected officials that we know who, when they were serving, we said, that guy or gal's up in the night. There's a fantasy that having the political parties in the mix will ensure better candidates. Ain't so. I gotta tell you, it's still possible to run by petition. My guess is that, the Republicans will field the candidate, the Democrats will field the candidate, and then there'll be 4 candidates who filed petitions to get on the ballot. I mean, we've lived through some bad managers. We've lived through some bad commissioners and council members. We've lived through commissioners who moved to Nevada while still serving. Unfortunately, I think this is largely a personality issue. And I challenge you, I don't think for hotels that are owned by investment groups that it would be healthy, useful, or effective for each of the investors to be able to come in and direct staff. That'd be pretty terrifying. I want the towels folded this way. No, that way. I don't want Cheerios at the breakfast buffet. I want cornflakes.
That's the beauty of our job. We get to tell those investors what their preview is, what they get to tell, and what departments are under their preview.
But you don't get to tell that to commissioners.
Yeah, we do though. That's part of our, if we were to choose commission, we would get to say to them, Commissioner 1, this is your preview. Commissioner 2. I mean, we could set that up.
But we don't get to determine who votes, who runs for each of those slots.
We don't get to determine who the councilmen are either.
We don't get to say, if you're going for slot A and you're in charge of HR, you have to have HR experience. We don't get to say that.
I'll throw one more, my last thought. I think we're getting pretty close to a vote. We've got a lot of comparisons with the business. The city is much more complex than that. We're putting this on one person. When that person goes out of town, unavailable, hopefully they'll have a deputy. That's the goal. I do think having more people accessible to you that are directly responsive at the end of the day, where you can hire them, fire them by vote, I think is important. We've had a bad scar for a manager that we didn't want in because we didn't know them, because they came from somewhere else. They looked like they had the experience. I'm saying I understand and agree with Bob completely. There are bad people bad at all jobs, be them lawyers, be it commissioners, be it managers, good, bad, and different. At the end of the day, I like knowing exactly who's going to run my government. I like being able to meet them. I get that with the commission. I understand if it has support to pass, I'm accepting of whatever government form, because I really don't think at the end of the day, I don't think if it was commissioners, it wouldn't be chaos. I think it can be resolved. It would be something completely new. And everybody that was interviewed, their form or their job had always been with appointed manager. It would be interesting for them to say otherwise, like, almost all, the majority. So, again, my 2 cents, I appreciate the debate we've had, the discussion we had. I think it's very healthy, and I'm glad we have differing opinions. Well,
you had 3 elections that ratified wanting a council. all the surveys, the majority by far was for a council with an appointed rep. And so,
Do you think those individuals knew they were voting for a commission, though? Because they were happy with the form of government as a commission.
it was
Whatever the
acting
tag,
like,
whatever
it was
the,
operating like a council, and that's what
It
they
wasn't.
thought they had.
it wasn't operating like a council. It was operating like a commission.
But the people didn't know that.
No.
But that's the exact
And it was
that's the
operating
exact
like
idea.
a council.
They're looking at
He
how
was
their
operating-
government's been run. They're
He was
looking at
op-
how it's
He
run.
was operating
But-
like a council.
What'd you say, Bob?
He said it was operating as a council.
Yeah.
Or yeah,
A kind of lame,
yeah.
odd council, but a council.
Judy.
The prevailing thought that I had, I had 2 or 3 people who came and went from my discussions that thought probably that the commissions worked. We all have horror stories of how commissions worked. We also have horror stories on how the council, the 7-man council, has went. So I can match horror stories with any of you if you'd like me to, but I don't think that that's productive.
That's
I
fun,
think
though.
our paramount responsibility is to make the county run properly. And I think the people who are running the county really asked us to not do any damage in the process. And I didn't have such a great experience with commissions. But I have 2 or 3 friends that are going to be ticked if I do. But I mean, it's all right. I've had that before. That's not a problem for me.
Okay.
I love you, Judy.
Any further discussion?
Who doesn't, right?
Seeing no further discussion,
I like that on the record, too.
we will bring this to a vote. The motion before us is to recommend having a appointed manager council form of government. It has been seconded, so all those in favor of an appointed council form of government, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 against. Those opposed? 3. It passes. With Stocks, Green, and Day voting against.
Mr. Chairman, move we adjourn.
No, not yet.
No.
We've got, you had discussion.
I would like, yeah.
So let's move through the agenda as proposed. Public hearings, possible action items, none. Future considerations. We had 1 future consideration from Bob Greenberg. He brought it up to me during the break to offer.
Future consideration.
Yeah, future consideration to offer compensation or reimbursement for snacks provided. I said I don't want any compensation. Ms. Green says none, so we don't have to have that. We appreciate.
No. Offer.
Offer,
Not
right.
force.
Offer, not force. But we've said thank you very
not
much.
wanting compensation does not moot the issue.
Oh.
We just need to take turns.
Oh, dear. Well, if somebody else wants to provide snacks next week, we could do that.
So it'll be on the agenda next
Okay,
time.
we'll put it on the agenda next time. If whether or not people will have snacks or funding or et cetera.
Well, if we could keep it under 2 hours, we wouldn't need to.
That'd be great. Do we at this point feel the need to have a closed session?
I would like to make a motion for a closed door session. I just have some
For what
questions for
purpose?
Mr. Anderson. For closed door sessions with our attorney, for some questions.
It has to
that I-
be reasonably imminent litigation.
It could be.
Has to be.
It very well.
He doesn't know whether it's imminent or not.
I don't know.
Well,
if
then
it's
it's not closed door session.
So it's a closed door session. I just want to know where we're at on our timetable and to ask some legal question of timetabling with Mr. Anderson.
I don't think that's the appropriate subject for a closed session.
Mr. Anderson,
By
could you weigh,
statute.
Mr. Anderson, could you weigh in on this?
If I were your legal counsel for deciding open meetings or not, I'd probably have to advise you that would not justify a closed meeting.
Okay.
That said, I'm not sure that's within my job description.
Hypothetically, good enough. No closed door session necessary.
You can talk to him privately.
Motion to adjourn by anybody?
I move we adjourn.
Second by Bob. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Yes.
Question before you
Oh, before we close, future consideration or comment?
What would you like me to do with the outline? Do you want me to draft it so it's
Yes.
based on a council manager with 5 council members?
Yes, please,
Yep.
with two
Two
districts.
districts and 3 at large.
2 districts, 3 at large.
Okay, and you'd like it to still be in an outline form? So
Oh,
can
we did-
answer
we've-
those questions?
Yeah,
please.
some other things for the future. A couple other things we missed for future consideration. We'd like to have Mr. Anderson. We spoke briefly about having you come down next week. I think it would be appropriate for you to come down and for us to address hang on, guys, for us to address the actual plan and go through it line by line and list that as a possible action item that we may decide some terms on the document.
All right, let me do this. I will redraft the outline in terms of the 2 motions that passed, but I will not change it from an outline to a rough draft form until we've had a chance to go through it line by line.
Excellent.
How's that sound?
Wonderful.
Thank you. Any other questions that you had for us, Mr. Anderson?
I'll try and get that to you on Monday.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All right, now we're adjourned. Leftover 4th of July popsicles.
I can't believe this is his hobby.
This is
His hobby.
that analogy of paying a
Fishing?
fisherman
I'm
to
like,
go
are you-
fish.
I'm like,
He means it. He means it.
I know
He's
he
not a
does.
fisherman.
No, I know he